Foundation's Edge by Isaac Asimov.
Read by Larry McKeever.
The fourth novel in the Foundation series. This book contains 367 pages in 20 chapters and an afterword. The following material appears on the dust jacket of the book. It is 498 years since the establishment of the first foundation. The threat of the mule has been rebuffed. On Trantor, it is a period of calm and prosperity. But an unexpected appearance by psychohistorian Harry Seldon raises some interesting questions, and the young councilman who asks them finds himself exiled into space in search of answers. Does the Second Foundation still exist, and does it continue to control human history from a secret galactic refuge? At issue, the destiny of humankind. Foundation's Edge is the most eagerly anticipated science fiction novel of our time. It is the first science fiction novel from the master in a decade, a stirring blend of actions and ideas with future technology and hyperspace travel. The sequel to the Foundation trilogy has all the wisdom, humor, and intrigue that have made its predecessors the most widely read science fiction series of all time. Asimov has done his classic threesome one better. Dedicated to Betty Prashker, who insisted, and to Lester Del Rey, who nagged. Prologue. The first galactic empire was falling. It had been decaying and breaking down for centuries, and only one man fully realized that fact. He was Harry Seldon, the last great scientist of the First Empire, and it was he who perfected psychohistory, the science of human behavior reduced to mathematical equations. The individual human being is unpredictable, but the reactions of human mobs, Seldon found, could be treated statistically. The larger the mob, the greater the accuracy that could be achieved. And the size of the human masses that Seldon worked with was no less than the population of all the inhabited millions of worlds of the galaxy. Seldon's equations told him that left to itself the empire would fall, and that 30,000 years of human misery and agony would elapse before a second empire would arise from the ruins. And yet, if one could adjust some of the conditions that existed, that interregnum could be decreased to a single millennium, just 1,000 years. It was to ensure this that Seldon set up two colonies of scientists that he called foundations. With deliberate intention, he set them up, quote, at opposite ends of the galaxy. The first foundation, which centered on physical science, was set up in the full daylight of publicity. The existence of the other, the second foundation, a world of psychohistorical and mentalic scientists, was drowned in silence. In the Foundation trilogy, the story of the first 4 centuries of the interregnum is told. The first foundation, commonly known as simply the Foundation, since the existence of another was unknown to almost all, began as a small community lost in the emptiness of the outer periphery of the galaxy. Periodically, it faced a crisis in which the variables of human intercourse and of the social and economic currents of the time constricted about it. Its freedom to move lay along only one certain line, and when it moved in that direction, a new horizon of development opened before it. All had been planned by Harry Seldon, long dead now. The first foundation, with its superior science, took over the barbarized planets that surrounded it. It faced the anarchic warlords who broke away from the dying empire and beat them. It faced the remnant of the empire itself under its last strong emperor and its last strong general and beat it. It seemed as though the Seldon plan was going through smoothly and that nothing would prevent the Second Empire from being established on time and with a minimum of intermediate devastation. But psychohistory is a statistical science. Always there is a small chance that something will go wrong, and something did, something which Harry Seldon could not have foreseen. One man, called the Mule, appeared from nowhere. He had mental powers in a galaxy that lacked them. He could mold men's emotions and shape their minds so that his bitterest opponents were made into his devoted servants. Armies could not, would not fight him. The first foundation fell, and Seldon's plan seemed to lie in ruins. There was left the mysterious second foundation, which had been caught unprepared by the sudden appearance of the Mule, but which was now slowly working out a counterattack. Its great defense was the fact of its unknown location. The Mule sought it in order to make his conquest of the galaxy complete. The faithful of what was left of the first foundation sought it to obtain help. Neither found it. The Mule was stopped first by the action of a woman, Beta Durrell, and that bought enough time for the second foundation to organize the proper action, and with that to stop the Mule permanently. Slowly they prepared to reinstate the Seldon plan. But in a way, the cover of the second foundation was gone. The first foundation knew of the second's existence, and the first did not want a future in which they were overseen by the mentalists. The first foundation was the superior in physical force, while the second foundation was hampered not only by that fact, but by being faced by a double task. It had not only to stop the first foundation, but had also to regain its anonymity. This the second foundation, under its greatest first speaker, Prem Palver, managed to do. The first foundation was allowed to seem to win, to seem to defeat the second foundation, and it moved on to greater and greater strength in the galaxy, totally ignorant that the second foundation still existed. It is now 498 years after the first foundation had come into existence. It is at the peak of its strength, but one man does not accept appearances. Chapter 1. Councilman. "I don't believe it, of course," said Golan Trevize, standing on the wide steps of Selden Hall and looking out over the city as it sparkled in the sunlight. Terminus was a mild planet with a high water-land ratio. The introduction of weather control had made it all the more comfortable and considerably less interesting, Trevize often thought. "I don't believe any of it," he repeated and smiled. His white, even teeth gleamed out of his youthful face. His companion and fellow councilman, Mun Lee Kampor, who had adopted a middle name in defiance of Terminus tradition, shook his head uneasily. "What don't you believe? That we saved the city?" "Oh, I believe that. We did, didn't we? And Selden said that we would, and he said we would be right to do so, and that he knew all about it 500 years ago. Kampor's voice dropped, and he said in a half-whisper, "Look, I don't mind your talking like this to me because I take it as just talk, but if you shout it out in crowds, others will hear, and frankly, I don't want to be standing near you when the lightning strikes. I'm not sure how precise the aim will be." Trevise's smile did not waver. He said, "Is there harm in saying that the city is saved and that we did it without a war?" "There was no one to fight," said Kampor. He had hair of a buttery yellow, eyes of a sky blue, and he always resisted the impulse to alter those unfashionable hues. "Have you never heard of civil war, Kampor?" said Trevize. He was tall. His hair was black, with a gentle wave to it, and he had a habit of walking with his thumbs hitched into the soft-fibered sash he always wore. "A civil war over the location of the capital?" The question was enough to bring on a Selden crisis. It destroyed Hannes's political career. It put you and me into the council last election, and the issue hung. He twisted one hand slowly back and forth, like a balance coming to rest on the level. He paused on the steps, ignoring the other members of the government and the media, as well as the fashionable society types who had finagled an invitation to witness Selden's return, or the return of his image at any rate. All were walking down the stairs, talking, laughing, glorying in the correctness of everything, and basking in Selden's approval. Trevize stood still and let the crowd swirl past him. Kampor, having walked 2 steps ahead, paused, an invisible cord stretching between them. He said, "Aren't you coming?" "There's no hurry. They won't start the council meeting until Mayor Brano has reviewed the situation in her usual flat-footed, one-syllable-at-a-time way. I'm in no hurry to endure another ponderous speech. Look at the city." "I see it. I saw it yesterday, too." "Yes, but did you see it 500 years ago when it was founded?" 498, Kampor corrected him automatically. 2 years from now, they'll have the hemi-millennial celebration, and Mayor Brano will still be in the office at the time, barring events of, we hope, minor probability." "We hope," said Trevize dryly. "But what was it like 500 years ago when it was founded? One city, one small city occupied by a group of men preparing an encyclopedia that was never finished. Of course it was finished. Are you referring to the Encyclopedia Galactica we have now? What we have isn't what they were working on. What we have is in a computer, and it's revised daily. Have you ever looked at the uncompleted original?" "You mean in the Hardin Museum?" "The Salver Hardin Museum of Origins. Let's have the full name, please, since you're so careful about exact dates. Have you looked at it?" "No. Why should I?" "No, it isn't worth it. But anyway, there they were, a group of encyclopedists forming the nucleus of a town, one small town in a world virtually without metals, circling the sun isolated from the rest of the galaxy, at the edge, the very edge. And now, 500 years later, we're a suburban world. The whole place is one big park with all the metal we want. We're at the center of everything now." "Not really," said Kampor. "We're still circling a sun isolated from the rest of the galaxy, still at the very edge of the galaxy." "Ah, no, you're saying that without thinking. That was the whole point of this little Selden crisis. We are more than the single world of Terminus. We are the foundation, which sends out its tentacles galaxy-wide and rules that galaxy from its position at the very edge. We can do it because we're not isolated, except in position, and that doesn't count." "All right, I'll accept that." Kampor was clearly uninterested and took another step downward. The invisible cord between them stretched farther. Trevize reached out a hand as though to haul his companion up the steps again. "Don't you see the significance, Kampor? There's this enormous change, but we don't accept it. In our hearts, we want the small foundation, the small one-world operation we had in the old days, the days of iron heroes and noble saints that are gone forever." come on. I mean it. Look at Selden Hall. To begin with, in the first crises in Salvor Hardin's day, it was just the time vault, a small auditorium in which the holographic image of Selden appeared. That was all. Now it's a colossal mausoleum. But is there a force field ramp in the place, a slideway, a gravitic lift? No, just these steps, and we walk down them, and we walk up them as Hardin would have had to do. At odd and unpredictable times, we cling in fright to the past. He flung his arm outward passionately. Is there any structural component visible that is metal? Not one. It wouldn't do to have any, since in Salvor Hardin's day there was no native metal to speak of, and hardly any imported metal. We even installed old plastic, pink with age, when we built this huge pile, so that visitors from other worlds can stop and say, "Galaxy, what lovely old plastic." I tell you, Campor, it's a sham. Is that what you don't believe, then, Selden Hall? And all its contents, said Trevize in a fierce whisper. I don't really believe there's any sense in hiding here at the edge of the universe just because our ancestors did. I believe we ought to be out there in the middle of everything. But Selden says you're wrong. The Selden plan is working out as it should. I know. And every child on Terminus is brought up to believe that Harry Selden formulated a plan, that he foresaw everything 5 centuries ago, that he set up the foundation in such a way that he could spot certain crises, and that his image would appear holographically at those crises and tell us the minimum we had to know to go on to the next crisis, and thus lead us through 1,000 years of history until we could safely build a second and greater galactic empire on the ruins of the old decrepit structure that was falling apart 5 centuries ago and had disintegrated completely by 2 centuries ago. Why are you telling me all this, Golan? Because I'm telling you it's a sham. It's all a sham. Or, if it was real to begin with, it's a sham now. We are not our own masters. It is not we who are following the plan. Campor looked at the other searchingly. You said things like this before, Golan, but I've always thought you were just saying ridiculous things to stir me up. By the galaxy, I actually think you're serious. Of course I'm serious. You can't be. Either this is some complicated piece of fun at my expense, or you're out of your mind. Neither, said Trevize, quiet now, hitching his thumbs into his sash as though he no longer needed the gestures of hands to punctuate passion. I speculated on it before, I admit, but that was just intuition. That farce in there this morning, however, has made it suddenly all quite plain to me, and I intend in turn to make it quite plain to the Council. Campor said, You are crazy. All right, come with me and listen. The two walked down the stairs. They were the only ones left, the last to complete the descent. And as Trevize moved slightly to the fore, Campor's lips moved silently, casting a voiceless word in the direction of the other's back. Fool. 2. Mayor Harlebrano called the session of the Executive Council to order. Her eyes had looked with no visible sign of interest at the gathering, yet no one there doubted that she had noted all who were present and all who had not yet arrived. Her gray hair was carefully arranged in a style that was neither markedly feminine nor imitation masculine. It was simply the way she wore it, no more. Her matter-of-fact face was not notable for beauty, but somehow it was never for beauty that one searched there. She was the most capable administrator on the planet. No one could or did accuse her of the brilliance of the Salvor Hardins and the Hober Mallows, whose histories enlivened the first 2 centuries of the Foundation's existence. But neither would anyone associate her with the follies of the hereditary Indboers who had ruled the Foundation just prior to the time of the Mule. Her speeches did not stir men's minds, nor did she have a gift for the dramatic gesture, but she had a capacity for making quiet decisions and sticking by them as long as she was convinced she was right. Without any obvious charisma, she had the knack of persuading the voters those quiet decisions would be right. Since by the Selden doctrine, historical change is to a large degree difficult to swerve, always barring the unpredictable, something most Seldenists forget, despite the wrenching incident of the Mule, the Foundation might have retained its capital on Terminus under any conditions. That is a might, however. Selden, in his just-finished appearance as a 5-century-old simulacrum, had calmly placed the probability of remaining on Terminus at 87.2%. Nevertheless, even to Seldenists, that meant there was a 12.8% chance that the shift to some point closer to the center of the Foundation Federation would have been made, with all the dire consequences that Selden had outlined. That this 1 out of 8 chance did not take place was surely due to Mayor Brano. It was certain she would not have allowed it. Through periods of considerable unpopularity, she had held to her decision that Terminus was the traditional seat of the Foundation, and there it would remain. Her political enemies had caricatured her strong jaw, with some effectiveness, it had to be admitted, as an underslung granite block. And now Selden had backed her point of view, and for the while at least that would give her an overwhelming political advantage. She had been reported to have said a year earlier that if in the coming appearance Selden did back her, she would consider her task successfully completed. She would then retire and take up the role of elder statesperson, rather than risk the dubious results of further political wars. No one had really believed her. She was at home in the political wars to an extent few before her had been, and now that Selden's image had come and gone, there was no hint of retirement about her. She spoke in a perfectly clear voice with an unashamed Foundation accent. She had once served as ambassador to Mandris, but had not adopted the old imperial style of speech that was so fashionable now, and was part of what had been a quasi-imperial drive to the inner provinces. She said, "The Selden crisis is over, and it is a tradition and a wise one that no reprisals of any kind, either in deed or in speech, be taken against those who supported the wrong side. Many honest people believed they had good reason for wanting that which Selden did not want. There is no point in humiliating them to the point where they can retrieve their self-respect only by denouncing the Selden plan itself. In turn, it is a strong and desirable custom that those who supported the lost side accept the loss cheerfully and without further discussion. The issue is behind us on both sides forever." She paused, gazed levelly at the assembled faces for a moment, then went on. "Half the time has passed, people of the Council, half the 1,000-year stretch between empires. It has been a time of difficulties, but we have come a long way. We are, indeed, almost a galactic empire already, and there remain no external enemies of consequence. The interregnum would have endured 30,000 years were it not for the Selden plan. After 30,000 years of disintegration, it might be there would be no strength left with which to form an empire again. There might be left only isolated and probably dying worlds. What we have today we owe to Harry Selden, and it is upon his long-dead mind that we must rely for the rest. The danger henceforward, councillors, is ourselves, and from this point on there must be no official doubt of the value of the plan. Let us agree now, quietly and firmly, that there are to be no official doubts, criticisms, or condemnations of the plan. We must support it completely. It has proved itself over 5 centuries. It is the security of humanity, and it must not be tampered with. Is it agreed?" There was a quiet murmur. The mayor hardly looked up to seek visual proof of agreement. She knew every member of the council and how each would react. In the wake of the victory, there would be no objection now. Next year, perhaps. Not now. She would tackle the problems of next year. Always except for... "Thought control, Mayor Brano?" asked Golan Trevize, striding down the aisle and speaking loudly as though to make up for the silence of the rest. He did not bother to take his seat, which, since he was a new member, was in the back row. Brano still did not look up. She said, "Your views, Councilman Trevize?" "That the government cannot impose a ban on free speech, that all individuals, most certainly including councilmen and councilwomen who have been elected for the purpose, have a right to discuss the political issues of the day, and that no political issue can possibly be divorced from the Selden plan." Brano folded her hands and looked up. Her face was expressionless. She said, "Councilman Trevize, you have entered this debate irregularly, and were out of order in doing so. However, I asked you to state your views, and I will now answer you. There is no limit to free speech within the context of the Selden plan. It is only the plan itself that limits us by its very nature. There can be many ways of interpreting events before the image makes the final decision, but once he makes that decision, it can be questioned no further in council. Nor may it be questioned in advance as though one were to say, 'If Harry Selden were to state thus and so, he would be wrong.' And yet if one honestly felt so, Madam Mayor, then one could say so, if one were a private individual discussing the matter in a private context." "You mean, then, that the limitations on free speech which you propose are to apply entirely and specifically to government officials?" "Exactly. This is not a new principle of Foundation law. It has been applied before by mayors of all parties. A private point of view means nothing. An official expression of opinion carries weight and can be dangerous. We have not come this far to risk danger now." "May I point out, Madam Mayor, that this principle of yours has been applied sparsely and occasionally to specific acts of council. It has never been applied to something as vast and indefinable as the Selden plan. The Selden plan needs the protection most, for it is precisely there that questioning can be most fatal. Will you not consider, Mayor Brano?" Trevize turned, addressing now the seated rows of council members who seemed one and all to have caught their breath as though awaiting the outcome of a duel. "Will you not consider, council members, that there is every reason to think that there is no Selden plan at all?" "We have all witnessed its workings today," said Mayor Brano, even more quietly, as Trevize became louder and more oratorical. "It is precisely because we have seen its workings today, councilmen and councilwomen, that we can see that the Selden plan, as we have been taught to believe it to be, cannot exist." Councilman Trevize, you are out of order and must not continue along these lines. I have the privilege of office, Mayor. That privilege has been withdrawn, Councilman. You cannot withdraw the privilege. Your statement limiting free speech cannot in itself have the force of law. There has been no formal vote in council, Mayor, and even if there were, I would have the right to question its legality. The withdrawal, Councilman, has nothing to do with my statement protecting the Selden plan. On what, then, does it depend? You are accused of treason, Councilman. I wish to do the council the courtesy of not arresting you within the council chamber, but waiting at the door are members of security who will take you into custody as you leave. I will ask you now to leave quietly. If you make any ill-considered move, then of course that will be considered a present danger, and security will enter the chamber. I trust you will not make that necessary. Trevize frowned. There was absolute silence in the hall. Did everyone expect this? Everyone but himself and Campor? He looked back at the exit. He saw nothing, but he had no doubt that Mayor Brano was not bluffing. He stammered in rage. I represent an important constituency, Mayor Brano. No doubt they will be disappointed in you. On what evidence do you bring forth this wild charge? That will appear in due course, but be assured that we have all we need. You are a most indiscreet young man and should realize that someone may be your friend and yet not be willing to accompany you into treason. Trevize whirled to meet Campor's blue eyes. They met his stonily. Mayor Brano said calmly, I call upon all to witness that when I made my last statement, Councilman Trevize turned to look at Councilman Campor. Will you leave now, Councilman, or will you force us to engage in the indignity of an arrest within the chamber? Golan Trevize turned, mounted the steps again, and at the door 2 men in uniform, well armed, fell in on either side. And Harla Brano, looking after him impassively, whispered through barely parted lips, Fool. 3. Leono Codell had been director of security through all of Mayor Brano's administration. It was not a back-breaking job, as he liked to say, but whether he was lying or not, one could not, of course, tell. He didn't look like a liar, but that did not necessarily mean anything. He looked comfortable and friendly, and it might well be that this was appropriate for the job. He was rather below the average height, rather above the average weight, had a bushy mustache, most unusual for a citizen of Terminus, that was now more white than gray, bright brown eyes, and a characteristic patch of primary color marking the outer breast pocket of his drab coverall. He said, Sit down, Trevize. Let us keep this on a friendly basis if we can. Friendly? With a traitor? Trevize hooked both his thumbs in his sash and remained standing. With an accused traitor. We have not yet come to the point where accusation, even by the mayor herself, is the equivalent of conviction. I trust we never do. My job is to clear you if I can. I would much rather do so now, while no harm is done, except perhaps your pride, rather than be forced to make it all a matter of a public trial. I hope you are with me in this. Trevize didn't soften. He said, Let's not bother with ingratiation. Your job is to badger me as though I were a traitor. I am not one, and I resent the necessity of having to have that point demonstrated to your satisfaction. Why should you not have to prove your loyalty to my satisfaction? In principle, none. The sad fact, however, is that I have power on my side and you have none on yours. Because of that, it is my privilege to question, and not yours. If any suspicion of disloyalty or treason fell upon me, by the way, I imagine I would find myself replaced, and I would then be questioned by someone else, who I earnestly hope would treat me no worse than I intend to treat you. And how do you intend to treat me? Like, I trust, a friend and an equal, if you will so treat me. Shall I stand you to a drink? Asked Trevize bitterly. Later, perhaps, but for now, please sit down. I ask it as a friend. Trevize hesitated, then sat. Any further defiance suddenly seemed meaningless to him. What now? He said. Now, may I ask that you will answer my questions truthfully and completely and without evasion? And if not, what is the threat behind it? A psychic probe? I trust not. I trust not, too. Not on the councilman. It will reveal no treason, and when I am then acquitted, I will have your political head, and the mayor's too, perhaps. It might almost be worth making you try a psychic probe. Codell frowned and shook his head slightly. Oh, no. Too much danger of brain damage. It's slow healing sometimes, and it would not be worth your while, definitely. You know, sometimes when the probe is used in exasperation. A threat, Codell? A statement of fact, Trevize. Don't mistake me, Councilman. If I must use the probe, I will. And even if you are innocent, you will have no recourse. What do you want to know? Codell closed a switch on the desk before him. He said, What I ask and what you answer to my questions will be recorded, both sight and sound. I do not want any volunteered statements from you or anything non-responsive, not at this time. You understand that, I am sure. I understand that you will record only what you please, said Trevize contemptuously. That is right. But again, don't mistake me. I will not distort anything you say. I will use it or not use it, that is all. But you will know what I will not use, and you will not waste my time and yours. We'll see. We have reason to think, Councilman Trevize, and somehow the touch of added formality in his voice was evidence enough that he was recording, that you have stated openly and on a number of occasions that you do not believe in the existence of the Selden plan. Trevize said slowly, If I have said so openly and on a number of occasions, what more do you need? Let us not waste time with quibbles, Councilman. You know that what I want is an open admission in your own voice, characterized by its own voice prints, under conditions where you are clearly in perfect command of yourself. Because I suppose the use of any hypno-effect, chemical or otherwise, would alter the voice prints? Quite noticeably. And you are anxious to demonstrate that you have made use of no illegal methods in questioning a councilman? I don't blame you. I'm glad you do not blame me, Councilman. Then let us continue. You have stated openly and on a number of occasions that you do not believe in the existence of the Selden plan. Do you admit that? Trevize said slowly, choosing his words, I do not believe that what we call Selden's plan has the significance we usually apply to it. A vague statement. Would you care to elaborate? My view is that the usual concept that Harry Selden, 500 years ago, making use of the mathematical science of psychohistory, worked out the course of human events to the last detail, and that we are following a course designed to take us from the first galactic empire to the second galactic empire along the line of maximum probability, is naive. It cannot be so. Do you mean that, in your opinion, Harry Selden never existed? Not at all. Of course he existed. That he never evolved the science of psychohistory? No, of course I don't mean any such thing. See here, Director, I would have explained this to the Council if I had been allowed to, and I will explain it to you. The truth of what I'm going to say is so plain. The Director of Security had quietly and quite obviously turned off the recording device. Trevize paused and frowned. Why did you do that? You are wasting my time, Councilman. I am not asking you for speeches. You are asking me to explain my views, aren't you? Not at all. I am asking you to answer questions, simply, directly, and straightforwardly. Answer only the questions and offer nothing that I do not ask for. Do that, and this won't take long. Trevize said, You mean you will elicit statements from me that will reinforce the official version of what I am supposed to have done? We ask you only to make truthful statements, and I assure you we will not distort them. Please, let me try again. We were talking about Harry Selden. The recording device was in action once more, and Codell repeated calmly, That he never evolved the science of psychohistory? Of course he evolved the science that we call psychohistory, said Trevize, failing to mask his impatience and gesturing with exasperated passion. Which you would define how? Galaxy. It is usually defined as that branch of mathematics that deals with the overall reactions of large groups of human beings to given stimuli under given conditions. In other words, it is supposed to predict social and historical changes. You say supposed to. Do you question that from the standpoint of mathematical expertise? No, said Trevize. I am not a psychohistorian, nor is any member of the Foundation government, nor any citizen of Terminus, nor any... Codell's hand raised. He said softly, Councilman, please. And Trevize was silent. Codell said, Have you any reason to suppose that Harry Selden did not make the necessary analysis that would combine as efficiently as possible the factors of maximum probability and shortest duration in the path leading from the first to the second empire by way of the Foundation? I wasn't there, said Trevize sardonically. How can I know? Can you know he didn't? No. Do you deny, perhaps, that the holographic image of Harry Selden that has appeared during each of a number of historical crises over the past 500 years is, in actual fact, a reproduction of Harry Selden himself, made in the last year of his life, shortly before the establishment of the Foundation? I suppose I can't deny that. You suppose. Would you care to say that it is a fraud, a hoax devised by someone in past history for some purpose? Trevize sighed. No, I am not maintaining that. Are you prepared to maintain that the messages that Harry Selden delivers are in any way manipulated by anyone at all? No, I have no reason to think that such manipulation is either possible or useful. I see. You witnessed this most recent appearance of Selden's image. Did you find that his analysis, prepared 500 years ago, did not match the actual conditions of today quite closely? On the contrary, said Trevize with sudden glee, it matched very closely. Codell seemed indifferent to the other's emotion. And yet, Councilman, after the appearance of Selden, you still maintain that the Selden plan does not exist. Of course I do. I maintain it does not exist precisely because the analysis matched so perfectly. Codell had turned off the recorder. Councilman, he said, shaking his head, you put me to the trouble of erasing. I ask if you still maintain this odd belief of yours, and you start giving me reasons. Let me repeat my question. He said, and yet, Councilman, after the appearance of Selden, you still maintain that the Selden plan does not exist. How do you know that? No one had a chance to speak to my informer friend Campor after the appearance. Let us say we guessed, Councilman, and let us say you have already answered, of course I do. If you will say that once more without volunteering added information, we can get on with it. Of course I do, said Trevize ironically. Well, said Codell, I will choose whichever of the of course I do sounds more natural. Thank you, Councilman. And the recording device was turned off again. Trevize said, is that it? For what I need, yes. What you need quite clearly is a set of questions and answers that you can present to Terminus and to all the Foundation Federation which it rules in order to show that I accept the legend of the Selden plan totally, that will make any denial of it that I later make seem quixotic or outright insane. Or even treasonable in the eyes of an excited multitude which sees the plan as essential to the Foundation's safety. It will perhaps not be necessary to publicize this, Councilman Trevize, if we can come to some understanding. But if it should prove necessary, we will see to it that the Federation hears. Are you fool enough, sir, said Trevize, frowning, to be entirely uninterested in what I really have to say? As a human being, I am very interested, and if an appropriate time comes, I will listen to you with interest and a certain amount of skepticism. As Director of Security, however, I have at the present moment exactly what I want. I hope you know that this will do you and the mayor no good. Oddly enough, I am not at all of that opinion. You will now leave. Under guard, of course. Where am I to be taken? Codell merely smiled. Goodbye, Councilman. You were not perfectly cooperative, but it would have been unrealistic to have expected you to be. He held out his hand. Trevize, standing up, ignored it. He smoothed the creases out of his sash and said, you only delay the inevitable. Others must think as I do now, or will come to think that way later. To imprison me or to kill me will serve to inspire wonder and eventually accelerate such thinking. In the end, the truth and I shall win. Codell took back his hand and shook his head slowly. Really, Trevize, he said, you are a fool. 4. It was not till midnight that 2 guards came to remove Trevize from what was, he had to admit, a luxurious room at security headquarters. Luxurious, but locked. A prison cell by any name. Trevize had over 4 hours to second-guess himself bitterly, striding restlessly across the floor for much of the period. Why did he trust Campor? Why not? He had seemed so clearly in agreement. No, not that. He had seemed so ready to be argued into agreement. No, not that either. It seemed so stupid, so easily dominated, so surely lacking a mind and opinions of his own, that Trevize enjoyed the chance of using him as a comfortable sounding board. Campor had helped Trevize improve and hone his opinions. He had been useful, and Trevize had trusted him for no other reason than that it had been convenient to do so. But it was useless now to try to decide whether he ought to have seen through Campor. He should have followed a simple generalization. Trust nobody. Yet can one go through life trusting nobody? Clearly, one had to. And who would have thought that Brano would have had the audacity to pluck a councilman out of the council, and that not one of the other councilmen would move to protect one of their own? Though they had disagreed with Trevize to their very hearts, though they would have been ready to bet their blood drop by drop on Brano's rightness, they should still on principle have interposed themselves against this violation of their prerogatives. Brano the Bronze, she was sometimes called, and she certainly acted with metallic rigor. Unless she herself was already in the grip, no, that way led to paranoia. And yet... His mind tiptoed in circles, and had not broken out of uselessly repetitive thought when the guards came. You will have to come with us, Councilman, the senior of the 2 said with unemotional gravity. His insignia showed him to be a lieutenant. He had a small scar on his right cheek, and he looked tired, as though he had been at his job too long and had done too little, as might be expected of a soldier whose people had been at peace for over a century. Trevize did not budge. Your name, Lieutenant? I am Lieutenant Evander Sopelor, Councilman. You realize you are breaking the law, Lieutenant Sopelor. You cannot arrest a councilman. The lieutenant said, We have our direct orders, sir. That does not matter. You cannot be ordered to arrest a councilman. You must understand that you will be liable for court-martial as a result. The lieutenant said, You are not being arrested, Councilman. Then I don't have to go with you, do I? We have been instructed to escort you to your home. I know the way. And to protect you en route. From what? Or from whom? From any mob that may gather. At midnight? It is why we have waited for midnight, sir. And now, sir, for your protection, we must ask you to come with us. May I say, not as a threat, but as a matter of information, that we are authorized to use force if necessary. Trevize was aware of the neuronic whips with which they were armed. He rose with what he hoped was dignity. To my home, then? Or will I find out that you are going to take me to prison? We have not been instructed to lie to you, sir, said the lieutenant with a pride of his own. Trevize became aware that he was in the presence of a professional man who would require a direct order before he would lie, and that even then his expression and his tone of voice would give him away. Trevize said, I ask your pardon, Lieutenant. I did not mean to imply that I doubted your word. A ground car was waiting for them outside. The street was empty, and there was no sign of any human being, let alone a mob. But the lieutenant had been truthful. He had not said there was a mob outside, or that one would form. He had referred to any mob that may gather. He had only said may. The lieutenant had carefully kept Trevize between himself and the car. Trevize could not have twisted away and made a run for it. The lieutenant entered immediately after him and sat beside him in the back. The car moved off. Trevize said, Once I am home, I presume I may then go about my business freely, that I may leave, for instance, if I choose? We have no order to interfere with you, Councilman, in any way, except insofar as we are ordered to protect you. Insofar? What does that mean in this case? I am instructed to tell you that once you are home, you may not leave it. The streets are not safe for you, and I am responsible for your safety. You mean I am under house arrest? I am not a lawyer, Councilman. I do not know what that means. He gazed straight ahead, but his elbow made contact with Trevize's side. Trevize could not have moved, however slightly, without the lieutenant becoming aware of it. The car stopped before Trevize's small house in the suburb of Flexner. At the moment, he lacked a housemate, Flavella having wearied of the erratic life that council membership had forced upon him, so he expected no one to be waiting for him. Do I get out now? Trevize asked. I will get out first, Councilman. We will escort you in. For my safety? Yes, sir. There were 2 guards waiting inside his front door. A night light was gleaming, but the windows had been opacified, and it was not visible from outside. For a moment he was indignant at the invasion, and then he dismissed it with an inward shrug. If the council could not protect him in the council chamber itself, then surely his house could not serve as his castle. Trevize said, How many of you do I have in here altogether? A regiment? No, Councilman, came a voice, hard and steady. Just one person, aside from those you see, and I have been waiting for you long enough. Harla Brano, mayor of Terminus, stood in the door that led to the living room. Time enough, don't you think, for us to talk? Trevize stared. All this rigmarole to... But Brano said in a low, forceful voice, Quiet, Councilman. And you 4, outside. Outside. All will be well in here. The 4 guards saluted and turned on their heels. Trevize and Brano were alone. Chapter 2. Mayor. 5. Brano had been waiting for an hour, thinking wearily. Technically speaking, she was guilty of breaking and entering. What's more, she had violated quite unconstitutionally the rights of a councilman. By the strict laws that held mayors to account since the days of Inboor III and the Mule nearly 2 centuries before, she was impeachable. On this one day, however, for 24 hours, she could do no wrong. But it would pass. She stirred restlessly. The first 2 centuries had been the golden age of the Foundation, the heroic era, at least in retrospect, if not to the unfortunates who had lived in that insecure time. Salver Hardin and Hober Mallow had been the 2 great heroes, semi-deified to the point of rivaling the incomparable Harry Seldon himself. The 3 were a tripod in which all Foundation legend, and even Foundation history, rested. In those days, though, the Foundation had been one puny world, with a tenuous hold on the 4 kingdoms, and with only a dim awareness of the extent to which the Seldon plan was holding its protective hand over it, caring for it even against the remnant of the mighty galactic empire. And the more powerful the Foundation grew as a political and commercial entity, the less significant its rulers and fighters had come to seem. Lathan Devers was almost forgotten. If he was remembered at all, it was for his tragic death in the slave mines, rather than for his unnecessary but successful fight against Bel Rios. As for Bel Rios, the noblest of the Foundation's adversaries, he too was nearly forgotten, overshadowed by the Mule, who alone among enemies had broken the Seldon plan and defeated and ruled the Foundation. He alone was the great enemy, indeed the last of the greats. It was little remembered that the mule had been in essence defeated by one person, a woman, Beta Darrell, and that she had accomplished a victory without the help of anyone, without even the support of the Selden plan. So, too, was it almost forgotten that her son and granddaughter, Torrin and Arcady Darrell, had defeated the second foundation, leaving the foundation, the first foundation, supreme. These latter-day victors were no longer heroic figures. The times had become too expansive to do anything but shrink heroes into ordinary mortals. Then, too, Arcady's biography of her grandmother had reduced her from a heroine to a figure of romance. And since then, there had been no heroes, not even figures of romance. The Calganian War had been the last moment of violence engulfing the Foundation, and that had been a minor conflict. Nearly 2 centuries of virtual peace, 120 years without so much as a ship scratched. It had been a good peace, Branno would not deny that, a profitable peace. The Foundation had not established a second galactic empire. It was only halfway there by the Selden plan. But as the Foundation Federation, it held a strong economic grip on over a third of the scattered political units of the galaxy, and influenced what it didn't control. There were few places where "I am of the Foundation" was not met with respect. There was no one who ranked higher in all the millions of inhabited worlds than the mayor of Terminus. That was still the title. It was inherited from the leader of a single, small, and almost disregarded city on a lonely world on the far edge of civilization some 5 centuries before. But no one would dream of changing it, or of giving it one atom more glory and sound. As it was, only the all-but-forgotten title of Imperial Majesty could rival it in awe. Except on Terminus itself, where the powers of the mayor were carefully limited. The memory of the Indpurs still remained. It was not their tyranny that people could not forget, but the fact that they had lost to the mule. And here she was, Harla Branno, the strongest to rule since the mule's death, she knew that, and only the 5th woman to do so. On this day only had she been able to use her strength openly. She had fought for her interpretation of what was right and what should be, against the dogged opposition of those who longed for the prestige-filled interior of the galaxy and for the aura of imperial power, and she had won. "Not yet," she had said. "Not yet. Jump too soon for the interior, and you will lose, for this reason and for that." And Selden had appeared and had supported her in language almost identical with her own. It made her, for a time, in the eyes of all the Foundation, as wise as Selden himself. She knew they could forget that any hour, however. And this young man dared to challenge her on this day of days, and he dared to be right. That was the danger of it. He was right, and by being right he might destroy the Foundation. And now she faced him, and they were alone. She said sadly, "Could you not have come to see me privately? Did you have to shout it all out in the council chamber in your idiotic desire to make a fool of me? What have you done, you mindless boy?" 6. Trevize felt himself flushing and fought to control his anger. The mayor was an aging woman who would be 63 on her next birthday. He hesitated to engage in a shouting match with someone nearly twice his age. Besides, she was well practiced in the political wars and knew that if she could place her opponent off balance at the start, then the battle was half won. But it took an audience to make such a tactic effective, and there was no audience before whom one might be humiliated. There were just the two of them. So he ignored her words and did his best to survey her dispassionately. She was an old woman, wearing the unisex fashions which had prevailed for 2 generations now. They did not become her. The mayor, the leader of the galaxy, if leader there could be, was just a plain old woman who might easily have been mistaken for an old man, except that her iron-gray hair was tied tightly back, instead of being worn free in the traditional male style. Trevize smiled engagingly. However much an aged opponent strove to make the epithet boy sound like an insult, this particular boy had the advantage of youth and good looks and the full awareness of both. He said, "It's true. I'm 32 and therefore a boy, in a manner of speaking, and I'm a councilman and therefore ex officio mindless. The first condition is unavoidable. For the second, I can only say I'm sorry." "Do you know what you've done? Don't stand there and strive for wit. Sit down. Put your mind into gear if you can and answer me rationally." "I know what I've done. I've told the truth as I've seen it. And on this day you try to defy me with it? On this one day when my prestige is such that I could pluck you out of the council chamber and arrest you with no one daring to protest?" "The council will recover its breath, and it will protest. They may be protesting now, and they will listen to me all the more for the persecution to which you are subjecting me." "No one will listen to you, because if I thought you would continue what you have been doing, I would continue to treat you as a traitor to the full extent of the law. I would then have to be tried. I'd have my day in court. Don't count on that. A mayor's emergency powers are enormous, even if they are rarely used." On what grounds would you declare an emergency?
I'll invent the grounds. I have that much ingenuity left, and I do not fear taking the political risk. Don't push me, young man. We are going to come to an agreement here, or you will never be free again. You will be imprisoned for the rest of your life. I guarantee it.
They stared at each other, Brano in gray, Trevize in multi-shade brown. Trevize said, "What kind of an agreement?" "Ah, you're curious. That's better. Then we can engage in conversation instead of confrontation. What is your point of view?" "You know it well. You have been crawling in the mud with Councilman Comfort, have you not?"
"I want to hear it from you, in the light of the Selden crisis just past."
"Very well, if that's what you want, Madam Mayor." He had been on the brink of saying old woman.
"The image of Selden was too correct, too impossibly correct after 500 years. It's the 8th time he's appeared, I believe. On some occasions, no one was there to hear him. On at least one occasion, in the time of Inboor III, what he had to say was utterly out of synchronization with reality. But that was in the time of the mule, wasn't it? But when, on any of those occasions, was he as correct as he was now?" Trevize allowed himself a small smile. "Never before, Madam Mayor, as far as our recordings of the past are concerned, has Selden managed to describe the situation so perfectly in all its smallest details." Brano said, "Is it your suggestion that the Selden appearance, the holographic image, is faked? That the Selden recordings have been prepared by a contemporary, such as myself, perhaps? That an actor was playing the Selden role?" "Not impossible, Madam Mayor, but that's not what I mean. The truth is far worse. I believe that it is Selden's image we see, and that his description of the present moment in history is the description he prepared 500 years ago. I have said as much to your man Codell, who carefully guided me through a charade in which I seemed to support the superstitions of the unthinking foundationer. Yes, the recording will be used, if necessary, to allow the Foundation to see that you were never really in the opposition." Trevize spread his arms. "But I am. There is no Selden plan, in the sense that we believe there is, and there hasn't been for perhaps 2 centuries. I have suspected that for years now, and what we went through in the time vault 12 hours ago proves it." "Because Selden was too accurate?" "Precisely. Don't smile. That is the final proof." "I'm not smiling, as you can see. Go on." "How could he have been so accurate? 2 centuries ago, Selden's analysis of what was then the present was completely wrong. 300 years had passed since the Foundation was set up, and he was wide of the mark completely. That, Councilman, you yourself explained a few moments ago. It was because of the mule. The mule was a mutant with intense mental power, and there had been no way of allowing for him in the plan. But he was there just the same, allowed or not. The Selden plan was derailed. The mule didn't rule for long, and he had no successor. The Foundation regained its independence and its domination. But how could the Selden plan have gotten back on target after so enormous a tearing of its fabric?" Brano looked grim, and her aging hands clasped together tightly. "You know the answer to that. We were one of 2 foundations. You've read the history books." "I've read Arcady's biography of her grandmother, required reading in school after all, and I've read her novels, too. I've read the official view of the history of the mule and afterward. Am I to be allowed to doubt them?" "In what way?" "Officially, we, the first foundation, were to retain the knowledge of the physical sciences and to advance them. We were to operate openly, our historical development following, whether we knew it or not, the Selden plan. There was, however, also the second foundation, which was to preserve and further develop the psychological sciences, including psychohistory, and their existence was to be a secret, even from us. The second foundation was the fine-tuning agency of the plan, acting to adjust the currents of galactic history when they turned from the paths outlined by the plan." "Then you answer yourself," said the mayor. "Beta Durrell defeated the mule, perhaps under the inspiration of the second foundation, although her granddaughter insists that was not so. It was the second foundation, without doubt, however, which labored to bring galactic history back to the plan after the mule died, and, quite obviously, they succeeded. What on terminus, then, are you talking about, Councilman?" "Madam Mayor, if we follow Arcady Durrell's account, it is clear that the second foundation, in making the attempt to correct galactic history, undermined Selden's entire scheme, since in their attempt to correct, they destroyed their own secrecy. We, the first foundation, realized that our mirror image, the second foundation, existed, and we could not live with the knowledge that we were being manipulated. We therefore labored to find the second foundation and to destroy it." Brano nodded. "And we succeeded, according to Arcady Durrell's account. But quite obviously, not until the second foundation had placed galactic history firmly on track again after its disruption by the mule. It is still on track." "Can you believe that?
The second foundation, according to the account, was located and its various members dealt with. That was in 378 FE, 120 years ago. For 5 generations, we have supposedly been operating without the second foundation, and yet have remained so close to target where the plan is concerned that you and the image of Selden spoke almost identically. This might be interpreted to mean that I have seen into the significance of developing history with keen insight. Forgive me, I do not intend to cast doubt upon your keen insight, but to me it seems that the more obvious explanation is that the second foundation was never destroyed. It still rules us. It still manipulates us. And that is why we have returned to the track of the Selden plan. 7. If the mare was shocked by the statement, she showed no sign of it. It was past 1 a.m., and she wanted desperately to bring an end to it, and yet could not hasten. The young man had to be played, and she did not want to have him break the fishing line. She did not want to have to dispose of him uselessly, when he might first be made to serve a function. She said, "Indeed? You say then that Arcady's tale of the Calganian War and the destruction of the second foundation was false? Invented? A game? A lie?" Trevize shrugged. "It doesn't have to be. That's beside the point. Suppose Arcady's account were completely true, to the best of her knowledge. Suppose all took place exactly as Arcady said it did, that the nest of second foundationers was discovered, and that they were disposed of. How can we possibly say, though, that we got every last one of them? The second foundation was dealing with the entire galaxy. They were not manipulating the history of Terminus alone, or even of the Foundation alone. Their responsibilities involved more than our capital world or our entire Federation. There were bound to be some second foundationers that were 1,000 or more parsecs away. Is it likely we would have gotten them all? And if we failed to get them all, could we say we had won? Could the mule have said it in his time? He took Terminus, and with it all the worlds it directly controlled, but the independent trading world still stood. He took the trading worlds, yet 3 fugitives remained, Ebling Miss, Beta Darrell, and her husband. He kept both men under control and left Beta, only Beta, uncontrolled. He did this out of sentiment, if we are to believe Arcady's romance, and that was enough. According to Arcady's account, one person, only Beta, was left to do as she pleased, and because of her actions, the mule was not able to locate the second foundation and was, therefore, defeated. One person left untouched, and all was lost. That's the importance of one person, despite all the legends that surround Selden's plan to the effect that the individual is nothing and the mass is all. And if we left not just one second foundationer behind, but several dozen, as seems perfectly likely, what then? Would they not gather together, rebuild their fortunes, take up their careers again, multiply their numbers by recruitment and training, and once more make us all pawns? Brano said gravely, "Do you believe that?" "I am sure of it. But tell me, Councilman, why should they bother? Why should the pitiful remnant continue to cling desperately to a duty no one welcomes? What drives them to keep the galaxy along its path to the Second Galactic Empire? And, if the small band insists on fulfilling its mission, why should we care? Why not accept the path of the plan, and be thankful that they will see to it that we do not stray or lose our way?" Trevize put his hand over his eyes and rubbed them. Despite his youth, he seemed the more tired of the two. He stared at the mayor and said, "I can't believe you. Are you under the impression that the Second Foundation is doing this for us? That they are some sort of idealists? Isn't it clear to you from your knowledge of politics, of the practical issues of power and manipulation, that they are doing it for themselves? We are the cutting edge. We are the engine, the force. We labor and sweat and bleed and weep. They merely control, adjusting an amplifier here, closing a contact there, and doing it all with ease and without risk to themselves. Then, when it is all done, and when after 1,000 years of heaving and straining, we have set up the Second Galactic Empire, the people of the Second Foundation will move in as the ruling elite." Brano said, "Do you want to eliminate the Second Foundation, then? Having moved halfway to the Second Empire, do you want to take the chance of completing the task on our own and serving as our own elite? Is that it?" "Certainly. Certainly. Shouldn't that be what you want, too? You and I won't live to see it, but you have grandchildren, and someday I may, and they will have grandchildren, and so on. I want them to have the fruit of our labors, and I want them to look back to us as the source and to praise us for what we have accomplished. I don't want it all to fall to a hidden conspiracy devised by Selden, who is no hero of mine. I tell you, he is a greater threat than the mule, if we allow his plan to go through. By the galaxy, I wish the mule had disrupted the plan altogether and forever. We would have survived him. He was one of a kind, and very mortal. The Second Foundation seems to be immortal."
But you would like to destroy the second foundation, is that not so?
If I knew how.
Since you don't know how, don't you think it quite likely they will destroy you?
Trevize looked contemptuous. I have had the thought that even you might be under their control. Your accurate guess as to what Selden's image would say and your subsequent treatment of me could be all second foundation. You could be a hollow shell with a second foundation content.
Then why are you talking to me as you are?
Because if you are under second foundation control, I am lost in any case, and I might as well expel some of the anger within me, because, in actual fact, I am gambling that you are not under their control, that you are merely unaware of what you do.
Brano said, You win that gamble at any rate. I am not under anyone's control but my own. Still, can you be sure I am telling the truth? Were I under control of the second foundation, would I admit it? Would I even myself know that I was under their control? But there is no profit in such questions. I believe I am not under control, and you have no choice but to believe it too. Consider this, however. If the second foundation exists, it is certain that their biggest need is to make sure that no one in the galaxy knows they exist. The Selden plan only works well if the pawns, we, are not aware of how the plan works and of how we are manipulated. It was because the mule focused the attention of the Foundation on the second foundation that the second foundation was destroyed in Arcady's time. Or should I say, nearly destroyed, Councilman. From this we can deduce two corollaries. First, we can reasonably suppose that they interfere grossly as little as they can. We can assume it would be impossible to take us all over. Even the second foundation, if it exists, must have limits to its power. To take over some and allow others to guess the fact would introduce distortions to the plan. Consequently, we come to the conclusion that their interference is as delicate, as indirect, as sparse as is possible, and therefore I am not controlled. Nor are you.
Trevize said, That is one corollary, and I tend to accept it, out of wishful thinking, perhaps. What is the other?
A simpler and more inevitable one. If the second foundation exists and wishes to guard the secret of that existence, then one thing is sure. Anyone who thinks it still exists and talks about it and announces it and shouts it to all the galaxy must in some subtle way be removed by them at once, wiped out, done away with. Wouldn't that be your conclusion, too?
Trevize said, Is that why you have taken me into custody, Madam Mayor, to protect me from the second foundation?
In a way, to an extent. Leono Cadel's careful recording of your beliefs will be publicized, not only in order to keep the people of Terminus and the Foundation from being unduly disturbed by your silly talk, but to keep the second foundation from being disturbed. If it exists, I do not want to have its attention drawn to you.
Imagine that, said Trevize with heavy irony. For my sake, for my lovely brown eyes?
Brano stirred and then, quite without warning, laughed quietly. She said, I am not so old, Councilman, that I am not unaware that you have lovely brown eyes, and 30 years ago that might have been motive enough. At this time, however, I wouldn't move a millimeter to save them, or all the rest of you, if only your eyes were involved. But if the second foundation exists, and if their attention is drawn to you, they may not stop with you. There's my life to consider, and that of a number of others far more intelligent and valuable than you, and all the plans we have made.
Oh? Do you believe the second foundation exists, then, that you react so carefully to the possibility of their response?
Brano brought her fist down upon the table before her. Of course I do, you consummate fool. If I didn't know the second foundation exists, and if I weren't fighting them as hard and as effectively as I could, would I care what you say about such a subject? If the second foundation did not exist, would it matter that you are announcing they do? I wanted for months to shut you up before you went public, but lacked the political power to deal roughly with the councilman. Selden's appearance made me look good and gave me the power, if only temporarily, and at that moment you did go public. I moved at once, and now I will have you killed without a twinge of conscience or a microsecond of hesitation if you don't do exactly as you're told. Our entire conversation now, at an hour in which I would much rather be in bed and asleep, was designed to bring you to the point of believing me when I tell you this. I want you to know that the problem of the second foundation, which I was careful to have you outline, gives me reason enough and inclination to have you brain-stopped without trial.
Trevize half rose from his seat.
Brano said, Oh, don't make any moves. I'm only an old woman, as you're undoubtedly telling yourself. But before you could place a hand on me, you'd be dead. We are under observation, foolish young man, by my people.
Trevize sat down. He said, just a bit shakily, You make no sense. If you believed the second foundation existed, you wouldn't be speaking of it so freely.
You wouldn't expose yourself to the dangers to which you say I am exposing myself. You recognize, then, that I have a bit more good sense than you do. In other words, you believe the second foundation exists, yet you speak freely about it because you are foolish. I believe it exists, and I speak freely too, but only because I have taken precautions. Since you seem to have read Arcadie's history carefully, you may recall that she speaks of her father having invented what she called a mental static device. It serves as a shield to the kind of mental power the second foundation has. It still exists, and has been improved on, too, under conditions of the greatest secrecy. This house is, for the moment, reasonably safe against their prying. With that understood, let me tell you what you are to do. What's that? You are to find out whether what you and I think is so is indeed so. You are to find out if the second foundation still exists, and if so, where. That means you will have to leave Terminus and go I know not where, even though it may in the end turn out, as in Arcadie's day, that the second foundation exists among us. It means you will not return till you have something to tell us, and if you have nothing to tell us, you will never return, and the population of Terminus will be less one fool. Trevize found himself stammering. Well, how on Terminus can I look for them without giving away the fact? They will simply arrange a death for me, and you will be none the wiser. Then don't look for them, you naive child. Look for something else. Look for something else with all your heart and mind, and if in the process you come across them because they have not bothered to pay you any attention, then good. You may in that case send us the information by shielded and coded hyperwave, and you may then return as a reward. I suppose you have something in mind that I should look for? Of course I do. Do you know Jen of Pellaret? Never heard of him. You will meet him tomorrow. He will tell you what you are looking for, and he will leave with you in one of our most advanced ships. There will be just the two of you, for two are quite enough to risk. And if you ever try to return without satisfying us that you have the knowledge we want, then you will be blown out of space before you come within a parsec of Terminus. That's all. This conversation is over. She arose, looked at her bare hands, then slowly drew on her gloves. She turned toward the door, and through it came two guards, weapons in hand. They stepped apart to let her pass. At the doorway she turned. There are other guards outside. Do nothing that disturbs them, or you will save us all the trouble of your existence. You will also then lose the benefits I might bring you, said Trevize, and with an effort he managed to say it lightly. We'll chance that, said Brano, with an unamused smile. 8. Outside, Leono Cadell was waiting for her. He said, I listened to the whole thing, Mayor. You were extraordinarily patient. And I am extraordinarily tired. I think the day has been 72 hours long. You take over now. I will, but tell me, was there really a mental static device about the house? Oh, Cadell, said Brano wearily, you know better than that. What was the chance anyone was watching? Do you imagine the Second Foundation is watching everything, everywhere, always? I'm not the romantic young Trevize is. He might think that, but I don't. And even if that were the case, if Second Foundational eyes and ears were everywhere, would not the presence of an MSD have given us away at once? For that matter, would not its use have shown the Second Foundation a shield against its powers existed, once they detected a region that was mentally opaque? Isn't the secret of such a shield's existence, until we are quite ready to use it to the full, something worth not only more than Trevize, but more than you and I together? And yet... They were in the ground car with Cadell driving. And yet, said Cadell. And yet what? Said Brano. Oh, yes. And yet that young man is intelligent. I called him a fool in various ways half a dozen times just to keep him in his place, but he isn't one. He's young, and he's read too many of Arcade Durrell's novels, and they have made him think that that's the way the galaxy is. But he has a quick insight about him, and it will be a pity to lose him. You are sure, then, that he will be lost? Quite sure, said Brano sadly. Just the same. It is better that way. We don't need young romantics charging about blindly and smashing in an instant perhaps what it has taken us years to build. Besides, he will serve a purpose. He will surely attract the attention of the Second Foundationers, always assuming they exist and are indeed concerning themselves with us. And while they are attracted to him, they will perchance ignore us. Perhaps we can gain even more than the good fortune of being ignored. They may, we can hope, unwittingly give themselves away to us in their concern with Trevize, and let us have an opportunity and time to devise countermeasures. Trevize, then, draws the lightning. Brano's lips twitched. Ah, the metaphor I've been looking for. He is our lightning rod, absorbing the stroke and protecting us from harm. And this Pellarat, who will also be in the path of the lightning bolt, he may suffer too. That can't be helped. Goodell nodded. Well, you know what Salvor Hardin used to say. Never let your sense of morals keep you from doing what is right. At the moment, I haven't got a sense of morals, muttered Brano. I have a sense of bone weariness. Yet, I could name a number of people I would sooner lose than Golan Trevize. He is a handsome young man. And, of course, he knows it. Her last words slurred as she closed her eyes and fell into a light sleep. Chapter 3. Historian. 9. Janov Pellarat was white-haired, and his face in repose looked rather empty. It was rarely in anything but repose. He was of average height and weight, and tended to move without haste and to speak with deliberation. He seemed considerably older than his 52 years. He had never left Terminus, something that was most unusual, especially for one of his profession. He himself wasn't sure whether his sedentary ways were because of or in spite of his obsession with history. The obsession had come upon him quite suddenly at the age of 15, when, during some indisposition, he was given a book of early legends. In it, he found the repeated motif of a world that was alone and isolated, a world that was not even aware of its isolation, since it had never known anything else. His indisposition began to clear up at once. Within 2 days, he had read the book 3 times and was out of bed. The day after that, he was at his computer terminal checking for any records that the Terminus University Library might have on similar legends. It was precisely such legends that had occupied him ever since. The Terminus University Library had by no means been a great resource in this respect, but when he grew older, he discovered the joys of interlibrary loans. He had printouts in his possession which had been taken off hyperradiational signals from as far away as Ifnia. He had become a professor of ancient history, and was now beginning his first sabbatical, one for which he had applied with the idea of taking a trip through space, his first, to Trantor itself, 37 years later. Pellarat was quite aware that it was most unusual for a person of Terminus to have never been in space. It had never been his intention to be notable in this particular way. It was just that whenever he might have gone into space, some new book, some new study, some new analysis came his way. He would delay his projected trip until he had wrung the new matter dry, and had added, if possible, one more item of fact or speculation or imagination to the mountain he had collected. In the end, his only regret was that the particular trip to Trantor had never been made. Trantor had been the capital of the First Galactic Empire. It had been the seat of emperors for 12,000 years, and before that, the capital of one of the most important pre-imperial kingdoms, which had little by little captured or otherwise absorbed the other kingdoms to establish the empire. Trantor had been a world-girdling city, a metal-coated city. Pellarat had read of it in the works of Gail Dornick, who had visited it in the time of Harry Seldon himself. Dornick's volume no longer circulated, and the one Pellarat owned might have been sold for half the historian's annual salary. A suggestion that he might part with it would have horrified the historian. Of course, what Pellarat cared about as far as Trantor was concerned was the Galactic Library, which in imperial times, when it was the Imperial Library, had been the largest in the galaxy. Trantor was the capital of the largest and most populous empire humanity had ever seen. It had been a single worldwide city with a population well in excess of 40 billion, and its library had been the gathered record of all the creative and not so creative work of humanity, the full summary of its knowledge. And it was all computerized in so complex a manner that it took experts to handle the computers. What was more, the library had survived. To Pellarat, that was the amazing thing about it. When Trantor had fallen and been sacked nearly 2.5 centuries before, it had undergone appalling destruction, and the tales of human misery and death would not bear repeating. Yet the library had survived, protected, it was said, by the university students, who used ingeniously devised weapons. Some thought the defense by the students might well have been thoroughly romanticized. In any case, the library had endured through the period of devastation. Ebling Miss had done his work in an intact library in a ruined world when he had almost located the second foundation, according to the story which the people of the Foundation still believed, but which historians have always treated with reserve. The 3 generations of Dorels, Beta, Tauran, and Arcady, had each at one time or another been on Trantor. However, Arcady had not visited the library, and since her time, the library had not impinged on galactic history. No Foundationer had been on Trantor in 120 years, but there was no reason to believe the library was not still there. That it had made no impingement was the surest evidence in favor of its being there. Its destruction would surely have made a noise. The library was outmoded and archaic. It had been so even in Ebbling Miss's time, but that was all to the good. Pellarat always rubbed his hands with excitement when he thought of an old and outmoded library. The older and the more outmoded, the more likely it was to have what he needed. In his dreams, he would enter the library and ask in breathless alarm, "Has the library been modernized? Have you thrown out the old tapes and computerizations?" And always he imagined the answer from dusty and ancient librarians, "As it has been, Professor, so is it still." And now his dream would come true. The mayor herself had assured him of that. How she had known of his work, he wasn't quite sure. He had not succeeded in publishing many papers. Little of what he had done was solid enough to be acceptable for publication, and what had appeared had left no mark. Still, they said Brano the Bronze knew all that went on in Terminus, and had eyes at the end of every finger and toe. Pellarat could almost believe it, but if she knew of his work, why on Terminus didn't she see its importance and give him a little financial support before this? Somehow, he thought, with as much bitterness as he could generate, the Foundation had its eyes fixed firmly on the future. It was the Second Empire and their destiny that absorbed them. They had no time, no desire to peer back into the past, and they were irritated by those who did. The more fools they, of course, but he could not single-handedly wipe out folly, and it might be better so. He could hug the great pursuit to his own chest, and the day would come when he would be remembered as the great pioneer of the important. That meant, of course, and he was too intellectually honest to refuse to perceive it, that he, too, was absorbed in the future, a future in which he would be recognized, and in which he would be a hero on a par with Harry Seldon. In fact, he would be the greater. For how could the working out of a clearly visualized future a millennium long stand comparison with the working out of a lost past at least 25 millennia old? And this was the day. This was the day. The mayor had said it would be the day after Seldon's image made its appearance. That was the only reason Pellarat had been interested in the Seldon crisis that for months had occupied every mind on Terminus, and indeed almost every mind in the Federation. It had seemed to him to make the most trifling difference as to whether the capital of the Foundation had remained here at Terminus or had been shifted somewhere else. And now that the crisis had been resolved, he remained unsure as to which side of the matter Harry Seldon had championed, or if the matter under dispute had been mentioned at all. It was enough that Seldon had appeared, and that now this was the day. It was a little after 2 in the afternoon that a ground car slid to a halt in the driveway of his somewhat isolated house just outside Terminus proper. A rear door slid back. A guard, in the uniform of the Mayoralty Security Corps, stepped out. Then a young man, then 2 more guards. Pellarat was impressed despite himself. The mayor not only knew of his work, but clearly considered it of the highest importance. The person who was to be his companion was given an honor guard, and he had been promised a first-class vessel, which his companion would be able to pilot. Most flattering. Most... Pellarat's housekeeper opened the door. The young man entered, and the 2 guards positioned themselves on either side of the entrance. Through the window, Pellarat saw that the 3rd guard remained outside, and that a 2nd ground car had now pulled up. Additional guards. Confusing. He turned to find the young man in his room, and was surprised to find that he recognized him. He had seen him on holocasts. He said, "You're that councilman. You're Trevize." "Golan Trevize, that's right. You are Professor Janoff Pellarat?" Yes, said Pellarat. "Are you he who will—" "We are going to be fellow travelers," said Trevize woodenly, "or so I've been told." "But you're not a historian." "No, I'm not. As you said, I'm a councilman, a politician." Yes, but what am I thinking about? I am a historian, therefore what need for another? You can pilot a spaceship." "Yes, I'm pretty good at that." "Well, that's what we need then. Excellent. I'm afraid I'm not one of your practical thinkers, young man, so if it should happen that you are, we'll make a good team." Trevize said, "I am not at the moment overwhelmed with the excellence of my own thinking, but it seems we have no choice but to try to make it a good team. Let's hope, then, that I can overcome my uncertainty about space. I've never been in space, you know, Councilman. I'm a groundhog, if that's the term. Would you like a glass of tea, by the way? I'll have Clodagh prepare us something. It is my understanding that it will be some hours before we leave, after all. I am prepared right now, however. I have what is necessary for both of us. The mayor has been most cooperative. Astonishing, her interest in the project." Trevize said, "You've known about this, then?" How long? Well, the mayor approached me. Here Pellerat frowned slightly and seemed to be making certain calculations. 2 or maybe 3 weeks ago. I was delighted. And now that I have got it clear in my head that I need a pilot and not a second historian, I am also delighted that my companion will be you, my dear fellow.
2, maybe 3 weeks ago, repeated Trevize, sounding a little dazed. She was prepared all this time, then, and I... He faded out.
Pardon me?
Nothing, Professor. I have a bad habit of muttering to myself. It is something you will have to grow accustomed to if our trip extends itself.
It will, said Pellerat, bustling the other to the dining-room table, where an elaborate tea was being prepared by his housekeeper. Quite open-ended. The mayor said we were to take as long as we liked, and that the galaxy lay all before us, and indeed that wherever we went we could call upon Foundation funds. She said, of course, that we would have to be reasonable. I promised that much. He chuckled and rubbed his hands. Sit down, my good fellow, sit down. This may be our last meal on Terminus for a very long time.
Trevize sat down. He said, Do you have a family, Professor?
I have a son. He's on the faculty at Santana University. A chemist, I believe, or something like that. He took after his mother's side. She hasn't been with me for a long time, so you see I have no responsibilities, no active hostages to fortune. I trust you have none. Help yourself to the sandwiches, my boy.
No hostages at the moment. A few women, they come and go.
Yes. Delightful when it works out. Even more delightful when you find it need not be taken seriously. No children, I take it?
None.
Good. You know, I'm in the most remarkable good humor. I was taken aback when you first came in, I admit it. But I find you quite exhilarating now. What I need is youth and enthusiasm and someone who can find his way about the galaxy. We're on a search, you know. A remarkable search.
Pellerat's quiet face and quiet voice achieved an unusual animation without any particular change in either expression or intonation.
I wonder if you have been told about this.
Trevise's eyes narrowed. A remarkable search?
Yes, indeed. A pearl of great price is hidden among the tens of millions of inhabited worlds in the galaxy, and we have nothing but the faintest clues to guide us. Just the same, it will be an incredible prize if we can find it. If you and I can carry it off, my boy, Trevize, I should say, for I don't mean to patronize, our names will ring down the ages to the end of time.
The prize you speak of, this pearl of great price.
I sound like Arcady Durrell, the writer, you know. Speaking of the second foundation, don't I? No wonder you look astonished.
Pellerat leaned his head back as though he were going to break into loud laughter, but he merely smiled.
Nothing so silly and unimportant, I assure you.
Trevize said, If you are not speaking of the second foundation, Professor, what are you speaking of?
Pellerat was suddenly grave, even apologetic. Ah, then the mayor has not told you. It is odd, you know. I've spent decades resenting the government and its inability to understand what I'm doing, and now Mayor Brano is being remarkably generous.
Yes, said Trevize, not trying to conceal an intonation of irony. She is a woman of remarkable hidden philanthropy, but she has not told me what this is all about.
You are not aware of my research, then?
No, I'm sorry.
No need to excuse yourself. Perfectly all right. I have not exactly made a splash. Then let me tell you. You and I are going to search for and find, for I have an excellent possibility in mind, Earth.
10. Trevize did not sleep well that night. Over and over he thrashed about the prison that the old woman had built around him. Nowhere could he find a way out. He was being driven into exile, and he could do nothing about it. She had been calmly inexorable, and did not even take the trouble to mask the unconstitutionality of it all. He had relied on his rights as a councilman and as a citizen of the Federation, and she hadn't even paid them lip service. And now this Pellerat, this odd academic who seemed to be located in the world without being part of it, told him that the fearsome old woman had been making arrangements for this for weeks. He felt like the boy that she had called him. He was to be exiled with a historian who kept dear-fellowing him, and who seemed to be in a noiseless fit of joy over beginning a galactic search for Earth? What in the name of the mule's grandmother was Earth? He had asked. Of course, he had asked upon the moment of its mention. He had said, "Pardon me, Professor. I'm ignorant of your specialty, and I trust you won't be annoyed if I ask for an explanation in simple terms. What is Earth?" Pellerat stared at him gravely while 20 seconds moved slowly past. He said, "It's a planet.
The original planet. The one on which human beings first appeared, my dear fellow. Trevize stared. First appeared? From where? From nowhere. It's the planet on which humanity developed through evolutionary processes from lower animals. Trevize thought about it, then shook his head. I don't know what you mean. An annoyed expression crossed Pellerat's face briefly. He cleared his throat and said, There was a time when Terminus had no human beings upon it. It was settled by human beings from other worlds. You know that, I suppose. Yes, of course, said Trevize impatiently. He was irritated at the other's sudden assumption of pedagogy. Very well. This is true of all the other worlds. Anacreon, Santani, Calgon, all of them. They were all, at some time in the past, founded. People arrived there from other worlds. It's true even of Trantor. It may have been a great metropolis for 20,000 years, but before that it wasn't. Why? What was it before that? Empty. At least of human beings. That's hard to believe. It's true. The old records show it. Where did the people come from who first settled Trantor? No one is certain. There are hundreds of planets which claim to have been populated in the dim mists of antiquity, and whose people present fanciful tales about the nature of the first arrival of humanity. Historians tend to dismiss such things and to brood over the origin question. What is that? I've never heard of it. That doesn't surprise me. It's not a popular historical problem now, I admit, but there was a time during the decay of the Empire when it roused a certain interest among intellectuals. Salvor Hardin mentions it briefly in his memoirs. It's the question of the identity and location of the one planet from which it all started. If we look backward in time, humanity flows inward from the most recently established worlds to older ones, to still older ones, until all concentrates on one, the original. Trevize thought at once of the obvious flaw in the argument. Might there not have been a large number of originals? Of course not. All human beings all over the galaxy are of a single species. A single species cannot originate on more than one planet. Quite impossible. How do you know? In the first place, Pellerat ticked off the first finger of his left hand with the first finger of his right, and then seemed to think better of what would undoubtedly have been a long and intricate exposition. He put both hands at his side and said with great earnestness, My dear fellow, I give you my word of honor. Trevize bowed formally and said, I would not dream of doubting it, Professor Pellerat. Let us say, then, that there is one planet of origin. But might there not be hundreds who lay claim to the honor? Not only might be, there are. Yet every claim is without merit. Not one of those hundreds that aspire to the credit of priority shows any trace of a pre-hyperspatial society, let alone any trace of human evolution from pre-human organisms. Then you are saying that there is a planet of origin, but that for some reason it is not making the claim. You have hit it precisely, and you are going to search for it. We are. That is our mission. Mayor Breno has arranged it all. You will pilot our ship to Trantor. To Trantor? It's not the planet of origin. You said that much a while ago. Of course Trantor isn't. Earth is. Then why aren't you telling me to pilot the ship to Earth? I'm not making myself clear. Earth is a legendary name. It is enshrined in ancient myths. It has no meaning we can be certain of, but it is convenient to use the word as a one-syllable synonym for the planet of origin of the human species. Just which planet in real space is the one we are defining as Earth is not known. Will they know on Trantor? I hope to find information there, certainly. Trantor possesses the Galactic Library, the greatest in the system. Well, surely that library has been searched by those people you said were interested in the origin question in the time of the First Empire. Pellerat nodded thoughtfully. Yes, but perhaps not well enough. I have learned a great deal about the origin question that perhaps the Imperials of 5 centuries back did not know. I might search the old records with greater understanding, you see. I have been thinking about this for a long time, and I have an excellent possibility in mind. You have told Mayor Brano all this, I imagine, and she approves? Approves? My dear fellow, she was ecstatic. She told me that Trantor was surely the place to find out all I needed to know. No doubt, muttered Trevize. That was part of what occupied him that night. Mayor Brano was sending him out to find out what he could about the second foundation. She was sending him with Pellerat so that he might mask his real aim with the pretended search for Earth, a search that could carry him anywhere in the galaxy. It was a perfect cover, in fact, and he admired the mayor's ingenuity. But Trantor? Where was the sense in that? Once they were on Trantor, Palarat would find his way into the Galactic Library and would never emerge. With endless stacks of books, films, and recordings, with innumerable computerizations and symbolic representations, he would surely never want to leave. Besides that, Ebling Miss had once gone to Trantor in the mule's time. The story was that he had found the location of the Second Foundation there and had died before he could reveal it. But then, so had Arcady Durrell, and she had succeeded in locating the Second Foundation. But the location she had found was on Terminus itself, and there the nest of Second Foundationers was wiped out. Wherever the Second Foundation was now would be elsewhere, so what more had Trantor to tell? If he were looking for the Second Foundation, it was best to go anywhere but Trantor. Besides that, what further plans Branno had he did not know, but he was not in the mood to oblige her. Branno had been ecstatic, had she, about a trip to Trantor? Well, if Branno wanted Trantor, they were not going to Trantor. Anywhere else, but not Trantor. And, worn out, with the night verging toward dawn, Trevize fell at last into a fitful slumber. 11. Membrano had had a good day on the one following the arrest of Trevize. She had been extolled far beyond her deserts, and the incident was never mentioned. Nevertheless, she knew well that the council would soon emerge from its paralysis, and that questions would be raised. She would have to act quickly. So, putting a great many matters to one side, she pursued the matter of Trevize. At the time when Trevize and Palarat were discussing Earth, Branno was facing Councilman Munli Kampor in the mayoralty office. As he sat across the desk from her, perfectly at ease, she appraised him once again. He was smaller and slighter than Trevize, and only 2 years older. Both were freshman councilmen, young and brash, and that must have been the only thing that held them together, for they were different in all other respects. Where Trevize seemed to radiate a glowering intensity, Kampor shone with an almost serene self-confidence. Perhaps it was his blond hair and blue eyes, not at all common among foundationers. They lent him an almost feminine delicacy that, Branno judged, made him less attractive to women than Trevize was. He was clearly vain of his looks, though, and made the most of them, wearing his hair rather long and making sure that it was carefully waved. He wore a faint blue shadowing under his eyebrows to accentuate the eye color. Shadowing of various tints had become common among men these last 10 years. He was no womanizer. He lived sedately with his wife, but had not yet registered parental intent, and was not known to have a clandestine second companion. That, too, was different from Trevize, who changed housemates as often as he changed the loudly colored sashes for which he was notorious. There was little about either young councilman that Codell's department had not uncovered, and Codell himself sat quietly in one corner of the room, exuding a comfortable good cheer as always. Branno said, "Councilman Kampor, you have done the Foundation good service, but unfortunately for yourself, it is not of the sort that can be praised in public or repaid in ordinary fashion." Kampor smiled. He had white and even teeth, and Branno idly wondered for one flashing moment if all the inhabitants of the Syria sector looked like that. Kampor's tale of stemming from that particular, rather peripheral region went back to his maternal grandmother, who had also been blonde-haired and blue-eyed, and who had maintained that her mother was from the Syria sector. According to Codell, however, there was no hard evidence in favor of that. Women being what they were, Codell had said, she might well have claimed distant and exotic ancestry to add to her glamour and her already formidable attractiveness. "Is that how women are?" Branno had asked dryly, and Codell had smiled and muttered that he was referring to ordinary women, of course. Kampor said, "It is not necessary that the people of the Foundation know of my service, only that you do." "I know, and I will not forget. What I also will not do is to let you assume that your obligations are now over. You have embarked on a complicated course, and you must continue. We want more about Trevize. I have told you all I know concerning him." "That may be what you would have me believe. That may even be what you truly believe yourself. Nevertheless, answer my questions. Do you know a gentleman named Janov Palarat?" For just a moment, Kampor's forehead creased, then smoothed itself almost at once. He said carefully, "I might know him if I were to see him, but the name does not seem to cause any association within me." "He is a scholar." Kampor's mouth rounded into a rather contemptuous but unsounded "oh," as though he were surprised that the mayor would expect him to know scholars. Branno said, "Palarat is an interesting person who, for reasons of his own, has the ambition of visiting Trantor. Councilman Trevize will accompany him. Now, since you have been a good friend of Trevize and perhaps know his system of thinking, tell me, do you think Trevize will consent to go to Trantor?" Kampor said,
If you see to it that Trevize gets on the ship, and if the ship is piloted to Trantor, what can he do but go there? Surely you don't suggest he will mutiny and take over the ship?
You don't understand. He and Pellerad will be alone on the ship, and it will be Trevize at the controls.
You're asking whether he would go voluntarily to Trantor?
Yes, that is what I'm asking.
Madam Mayor, how can I possibly know what he will do?
Councilman Campor, you have been close to Trevize. You know his belief in the existence of the Second Foundation. Has he never spoken to you of his theories as to where it might exist, where it might be found?
Never, Madam Mayor.
Do you think he will find it?
Campor chuckled. I think the Second Foundation, whatever it was, and however important it might have been, was wiped out in the time of Arcade Durrell. I believe her story.
Indeed. In that case, why did you betray your friend? If he were searching for something that does not exist, what harm could he have done by propounding his quaint theories?
Campor said, It is not the truth alone that can harm. His theories may have been merely quaint, but they might have succeeded in unsettling the people of Terminus, and by introducing doubts and fears as to the Foundation's role in the great drama of galactic history, have weakened its leadership of the Federation and its dreams of a second galactic empire. Clearly, you thought this yourself, or you would not have seized him on the floor of the Council, and you would not now be forcing him into exile without trial. Why have you done so, if I may ask, Mayor?
Shall we say that I was cautious enough to wonder if there were some faint chance that he might be right, and that the expression of his views might be actively and directly dangerous?
Campor said nothing.
Brenna said, I agree with you, but I am forced by the responsibilities of my position to consider the possibility. Let me ask you again, if you have any indication as to where he might think the Second Foundation exists, and where he might go.
I have none.
He has never given you any hints in that direction?
No, of course not.
Never? Don't dismiss the thought easily. Think. Never?
Never, said Campor firmly.
No hints, no joking remarks, no doodles, no thoughtful abstractions at moments that achieve significance as you look back on them?
None. I tell you, Madam Mayor, his dreams of the Second Foundation are the most nebulous starshine. You know it, and you but waste your time and your emotions in your concern over it.
You are not by some chance suddenly changing sides again and protecting the friend you delivered into my hands?
No, said Campor. I turned him over to you for what seemed to me to be good and patriotic reasons. I have no reason to regret the action or to change my attitude.
Then you can give me no hint as to where he might go once he has a ship at his disposal?
As I have already said,
and yet, Councilman,
and here the lines of the mayor's face so folded as to make her seem wistful,
I would like to know where he goes.
In that case, I think you ought to place a hyper-relay on his ship.
I have thought of that, Councilman. He is, however, a suspicious man, and I suspect he will find it, however cleverly it might be placed. Of course, it might be placed in such a way that he cannot remove it without crippling the ship, and he might therefore be forced to leave it in place.
An excellent notion.
Except that, said Brano, he would then be inhibited. He might not go where he would go if he felt himself free and untrammeled. The knowledge I would gain would be useless to me.
In that case, it appears you cannot find out where he will go.
I might, for I intend to be very primitive. A person who expects the completely sophisticated and who guards against it is quite apt never to think of the primitive. I'm thinking of having Trevize followed.
Followed?
Exactly. By another pilot in another spaceship. See how astonished you are at the thought? He would be equally astonished. He might not think of scouring space for an accompanying mass. And, in any case, we will see to it that his ship is not equipped with our latest mass detection devices.
Campor said, Madam Mayor, I speak with all possible respect, but I must point out that you lack experience in spaceflight. To have one ship followed by another is never done, because it won't work. Trevize will escape with the first hyperspatial jump. Even if he doesn't know he is being followed, that first jump will be his path to freedom. If he doesn't have a hyper-relay on board ship, he can't be traced. I admit my lack of experience. Unlike you and Trevize, I have had no naval training. Nevertheless, I am told by my advisors, who have had such training, that if a ship is observed immediately prior to a jump, its direction, speed, and acceleration make it possible to guess what the jump might be in a general way. Given a good computer and an excellent sense of judgment, a follower might duplicate the jump closely enough to pick up the trail at the other end, especially if the follower has a good mass detector. That might happen once, said Campor energetically, even twice if the follower is very lucky. But that's it. You can't rely on such things.
Perhaps we can. Councilman Campor, you have hyper-raced in your time. You see, I know a great deal about you. You are an excellent pilot and have done amazing things when it comes to following a competitor through a jump." Campor's eyes widened. He almost squirmed in his chair. "I was in college then. I am older now." "Not too old. Not yet 35. Consequently, you are going to follow Trevize, Councilman. Where he goes, you will follow, and you will report back to me. You will leave soon after Trevize does, and he will be leaving in a few hours. If you refuse the task, Councilman, you will be imprisoned for treason. If you take the ship that we will provide for you, and if you fail to follow, you need not bother coming back. You will be shot out of space if you try." Campo rose sharply to his feet. "I have a life to live. I have work to do. I have a wife. I cannot leave it all." "You will have to. Those of us who choose to serve the Foundation must be prepared at all times to serve it in a prolonged and uncomfortable fashion, if that should become necessary." "My wife must go with me, of course." "Do you take me for an idiot? She stays here, of course." "As a hostage?" "If you like the word. I prefer to say that you will be taking yourself into danger, and my kind heart wants her to stay here where she will not be in danger. There is no room for discussion. You are as much under arrest as Trevize is, and I am sure you understand I must act quickly, before the euphoria enveloping Terminus wears off. I fear my star will soon be in the descendant." 12. Goodell said, "You were not easy on him, Madam Mayor." The mayor said with a sniff, "Why should I have been? He betrayed a friend." "That was useful to us." "Yes, as it happened. His next betrayal, however, might not be." "Why should there be another?" "Come, Leono," said Brano impatiently. "Don't play games with me. Anyone who displays a capacity for double-dealing must forever be suspected of being capable of displaying it again." "He may use the capability to combine with Trevize once again. Together they may—" "You don't believe that. With all his folly and naivete, Trevize goes straight for his goal. He does not understand betrayal, and he will never, under any circumstances, trust Campor a second time." Goodell said, "Pardon me, Mayor, but let me make sure I follow your thinking. How far, then, can you trust Campor? How do you know he will follow Trevize and report honestly? Do you count on his fears for the welfare of his wife as a restraint, his longing to return to her?" "Both are factors. But I don't entirely rely on that. On Campor's ship, there will be a hyper-relay. Trevize would suspect pursuit and would search for one. However, Campor, being the pursuer, will, I assume, not suspect pursuit and will not search for one. Of course, if he does, and if he finds it, then we must depend on the attractions of his wife." Goodell laughed. "To think I once had to give you lessons. And the purpose of the pursuit?" "A double layer of protection. If Trevize is caught, it may be that Campor will carry on and give us the information that Trevize will not be able to." "One more question. What if by some chance Trevize finds the second Foundation and we learn of it through him, or through Campor, if we gain reason to suspect its existence, despite the deaths of both?" "I'm hoping the second Foundation does exist, Leono," she said. "In any case, the Selden plan is not going to serve us much longer. The great Harry Selden devised it in the dying days of the Empire, when technological advance had virtually stopped. Selden was a product of his times, too, and however brilliant this semi-mythical science of psychohistory must have been, it could not rise out of its roots. It surely would not allow for rapid technological advance. The Foundation has been achieving that, especially in this last century. We have mass detection devices of a kind undreamed of earlier, computers that can respond to thought, and most of all, mental shielding. The Second Foundation cannot control us for much longer if they can do so now. I want, in my final years in power, to be the one to start Terminus on a new path." "And if there is, in fact, no Second Foundation?" "Then we start on a new path at once." 13. The troubled sleep that had finally come to Trevize did not last long. A touch on his shoulder was repeated a second time. Trevize started up, bleary and utterly failing to understand why he should be in a strange bed. What? Ballarat said to him apologetically, "I'm sorry, Councilman Trevize. You are my guest, and I owe you rest, but the mayor is here." He was standing at the side of the bed in flannel pajamas and shivering slightly. Trevize's senses leaped to a weary wakefulness, and he remembered. The mayor was in Ballarat's living room, looking as composed as always. Goodell was with her, rubbing lightly at his white mustache. Trevize adjusted his sash to the proper snugness and wondered how long the two of them, Brano and Goodell, were ever apart. Trevize said mockingly, "Has the council recovered yet? Are its members concerned over the absence of one of them?" The mayor said, "There are signs of life, yes, but not enough to do you any good. There is no question but that I still have the power to force you to leave.
You will be taken to Ultimate Spaceport. Not Terminus Spaceport, Madame Mayor? Am I to be deprived of a proper farewell from weeping thousands? I see you have recovered your penchant for teenage silliness, Councilman, and I am pleased. It stills what might otherwise be a certain rising twinge of conscience. At Ultimate Spaceport, you and Professor Pellerat will leave quietly, and never return, and perhaps never return. Of course, and here she smiled briefly, if you discover something of so great an importance and usefulness that even I will be glad to have you back with your information, you will return. You may even be treated with honor. Trevize nodded casually. That may happen. Almost anything may happen. In any case, you will be comfortable. You are being assigned a recently completed pocket cruiser, the Far Star, named for Hober Mallow's cruiser. One person can handle it, though it will hold as many as 3 with reasonable comfort. Trevize was jolted out of his carefully assumed mood of light irony. Fully armed? Unarmed, but otherwise fully equipped. Wherever you go, you will be citizens of the Foundation, and there will always be a consul to whom you can turn, so you will not require arms. You will be able to draw on funds at need, not unlimited funds, I might add. You are generous. I know that, Councilman. But, Councilman, understand me. You are helping Professor Pellerat search for Earth. Whatever you think you are searching for Earth. All whom you meet must understand that, and always remember that the Far Star is not armed. I am searching for Earth, said Trevize. I understand that perfectly. Then you will go now. Pardon me, but surely there is more to all of this than we have discussed. I have piloted ships in my time, but I have no experience with a late-model pocket cruiser. What if I cannot pilot it? I am told that the Far Star is thoroughly computerized, and before you ask, you don't have to know how to handle a late-model ship's computer. It will itself tell you anything you need to know. Is there anything else you need? Trevize looked down at himself ruefully. A change of clothing. You will find them on board ship, including those girdles you wear, or sashes, whichever they are called. The professor is also supplied with what he needs. Everything reasonable is already aboard, although I hasten to add that this does not include female companions. Too bad, said Trevize. It would be pleasant. But then, I have no likely candidate at the moment as it happens. Still, I presume the galaxy is populous, and that once away from here I may do as I please. With regard to companions, suit yourself. She rose heavily. I will not take you to the spaceport, she said, but there are those who will, and you must make no effort to do anything you are not told to do. I believe they will kill you if you make an effort to escape. The fact that I will not be with them will remove any inhibition. Trevize said, I will make no unauthorized effort, Madam Mayor. But one thing. Yes? Trevize searched his mind rapidly and finally said with a smile that he very much hoped looked unforced. The time may come, Madam Mayor, when you will ask me for an effort. I will then do as I choose, but I will remember the past 2 days. Mayor Brano sighed. Spare me the melodrama. If the time comes, it will come. But for now, I am asking for nothing. Chapter 4. Space. 14. The ship looked even more impressive than Trevize, with his memories of the time when the new cruiser class had been glowingly publicized, had expected. It was not the size that was impressive, for it was rather small. It was designed for maneuverability and speed, for totally gravitic engines, and most of all, for advanced computerization. It didn't need size. Size would have defeated its purpose. It was a one-man device that could replace with advantage the older ships that required a crew of a dozen or more. With a second or even a third person to establish shifts of duty, one such ship could fight off a flotilla of much larger non-Foundation ships. In addition, it could outspeed and escape from any other ship in existence. There was a sleekness about it, not a wasted line, not a superfluous curve inside or out. Every cubic meter of volume was used to its maximum, so as to leave a paradoxical aura of spaciousness within. Nothing the mayor might have said about the importance of his mission could have impressed Trevize more than the ship with which he was asked to perform it. Brano the Bronze, he thought with chagrin, had maneuvered him into a dangerous mission of the greatest significance. He might not have accepted with such determination had she not so arranged matters that he wanted to show her what he could do. As for Pellerat, he was transported with wonder. Would you believe, he said, placing a gentle finger on the hull before he had climbed inside, that I've never been close to a spaceship? I'll believe it, of course, if you say so, Professor. But how did you manage it? I scarcely know, to be honest with you, my dear Trevize. I presume I was overly concerned with my research.
When one's home has a really excellent computer capable of reaching other computers anywhere in the galaxy, one scarcely needs to budge, you know. Somehow I expected spaceships to be larger than this. This is a small model, but even so, it's much larger inside than any other ship of this size. How can that be? You are making fun of my ignorance. No, I'm serious. This is one of the first ships to be completely graviticized. What does that mean? Please don't explain if it requires extensive physics. I will take your word, as you took mine yesterday, in connection with the single species of humanity and the single world of origin. Let's try, Professor Pellerat. Through all the thousands of years of spaceflight, we've had chemical motors and ionic motors and hyperatomic motors, and all these things have been bulky. The old Imperial Navy had ships 500 meters long with no more living space in them than would fit into a small apartment. Fortunately, the Foundation has specialized in miniaturization through all the centuries of its existence, thanks to its lack of material resources. This ship is the culmination. It makes use of anti-gravity, and the device that makes that possible takes up virtually no space and is actually included in the hull. If it weren't that we still need the hyperatomic... A security guard approached. You will have to get on, gentlemen. The sky was growing light, though sunrise was still half an hour off. Trevize looked about. Is my baggage loaded? Yes, Councilman. You will find the ship fully equipped. With clothing, I suppose, that is not my size or to my taste. The guard smiled, quite suddenly and almost boyishly. I think it is, he said. The mayor had us working overtime these last 30 or 40 hours, and we've matched what you had closely. Money, no object. Listen. He looked about, as though to make sure no one noticed his sudden fraternization. You two are lucky. Best ship in the world, fully equipped, except for armament. You're swimming in cream. Sour cream, possibly, said Trevize. Well, Professor, are you ready? With this I am, Pellerat said, and held up a square wafer about 20 centimeters to the side and encased in a jacket of silvery plastic. Trevize was suddenly aware that Pellerat had been holding it since they had left his home, shifting it from hand to hand and never putting it down, even when they had stopped for a quick breakfast. What's that, Professor? My library. It's indexed by subject matter and origin, and I've gotten it all into one wafer. If you think this ship is a marvel, how about this wafer? A whole library, everything I have collected. Wonderful, wonderful. Well, said Trevize, we are swimming in cream. 15. Trevize marveled at the inside of the ship. The utilization of space was ingenious. There was a storeroom with supplies of food, clothing, films, and games. There was a gym, a parlor, and 2 nearly identical bedrooms. This one, said Trevize, must be yours, Professor. At least it contains an FX reader. Good, said Pellerat with satisfaction. What an ass I have been to avoid spaceflight as I have. I could live here, my dear Trevize, in utter satisfaction. Roomier than I expected, said Trevize with pleasure. And the engines are really in the hull, as you said? The controlling devices are, at any rate. We don't have to store fuel or make use of it on the spot. We're making use of the fundamental energy store of the universe, so that the fuel and the engines are all out there. He gestured vaguely. Well, now that I think of it, what if something goes wrong? Trevize shrugged. I've been trained at space navigation, but not on these ships. If something goes wrong with the gravitics, I'm afraid there's nothing I can do about it. But can you run the ship, pilot it? I'm wondering that myself. Pellerat said, Do you suppose this is an automated ship? Might we not merely be passengers? We might simply be expected to sit here. They have such things in the case of ferries between planets and space stations within a stellar system, but I never heard of automated hyperspace travel. At least, not so far. Not so far. He looked about again, and there was a trickle of apprehension within him. Had that Harridan mayor managed to maneuver that far ahead of him? Had the Foundation automated interstellar travel too, and was he going to be deposited on Trantor quite against his will and with no more to say about it than any of the rest of the furniture aboard ship? He said with a cheerful animation he didn't feel, Professor, you sit down. The mayor said this ship was completely computerized. If your room has the FX reader, mine ought to have a computer in it. Make yourself comfortable and let me look around a bit on my own. Pellerat looked instantly anxious. Trevize, my dear chap, you're not getting off the ship, are you? Not my plan at all, Professor. And if I tried, you can count on my being stopped. It is not the mayor's intention to allow me off. All I'm planning to do is to learn what operates the Far Star. He smiled. I won't desert you, Professor. He was still smiling as he entered what he felt to be his own bedroom, but his face grew sober as he closed the door softly behind him. Surely there must be some means of communicating with a planet in the neighborhood of the ship. It was impossible to imagine a ship deliberately sealed off from its surroundings, and therefore somewhere, perhaps in a wall recess, there would have to be a reacher. He could use it to call the mayor's office to ask about controls. Carefully, he inspected the walls, the headboard of the bed, and the neat, smooth furniture. If nothing turned up here, he would go through the rest of the ship. He was about to turn away when his eye caught a glint of light on the smooth, light brown surface of the desk. A round circle of light with neat lettering that read, "Computer Instructions." Ah! Nevertheless, his heart beat rapidly. There were computers and computers, and there were programs that took a long time to master. Trevize had never made the mistake of underestimating his own intelligence, but on the other hand, he was not a grand master. There were those who had a knack for using a computer and those who had not, and Trevize knew very well into which class he fell. In his hitch in the Foundation Navy, he had reached the rank of lieutenant, and had on occasion been officer of the day, and had had occasion to use the ship's computer. He had never been in sole charge of it, however, and he had never been expected to know anything more than the routine maneuvers being officer of the day required. He remembered with a sinking feeling the volumes taken up by a fully described program in printout, and he could recall the behavior of Technical Sergeant Krasnet at the console of the ship's computer. He played it as though it were the most complex musical instrument in the galaxy, and did it all with an air of nonchalance, as though he were bored at its simplicity. Yet even he had had to consult the volumes at times, swearing at himself in embarrassment. Hesitantly, Trevize placed a finger on the circle of light, and at once the light spread out to cover the desktop. On it were the outline of two hands, a right and a left. With a sudden, smooth movement, the desktop tilted to an angle of 45 degrees. Trevize took the seat before the desk. No words were necessary. It was clear what he was expected to do. He placed his hands on the outlines on the desk, which were positioned for him to do so without strain. The desktop seemed soft, nearly velvety where he touched it, and his hands sank in. He stared at his hands with astonishment, for they had not sunk in at all. They were on the surface, his eyes told him. Yet to his sense of touch, it was as though the desk surface had given way, and as though something were holding his hands softly and warmly. Was that all? Now what? He looked about, and then closed his eyes in response to a suggestion. He had heard nothing. He had heard nothing. But inside his brain, as though it were a vagrant thought of his own, there was the sentence, "Please close your eyes, relax, we will make connection." Through the hands? Somehow, Trevize had always assumed that if one were going to communicate by thought with a computer, it would be through a hood placed over the head and with electrodes against the eyes and skull. The hands? But why not the hands? Trevize found himself floating away, almost drowsy, but with no loss of mental acuity. Why not the hands? The eyes were no more than sense organs. The brain was no more than a central switchboard encased in bone and removed from the working surface of the body. It was the hands that were the working surface, the hands that felt and manipulated the universe. Human beings thought with their hands. It was their hands that were the answer of curiosity, that felt and pinched and turned and lifted and hefted. There were animals that had brains of respectable size, but they had no hands, and that made all the difference. And as he and the computer held hands, their thinking merged, and it no longer mattered whether his eyes were open or closed. Opening them did not improve his vision, nor did closing them dim it. Either way, he saw the room with complete clarity, not just in the direction in which he was looking, but all around and above and below. He saw every room in the spaceship, and he saw outside as well. The sun had risen, and its brightness was dimmed in the morning mist, but he could look at it directly without being dazzled, for the computer automatically filtered the light waves. He felt the gentle wind and its temperature, and the sounds of the world about him. He detected the planet's magnetic field and the tiny electrical charges on the wall of the ship. He became aware of the controls of the ship without even knowing what they were in detail. He knew only that if he wanted to lift the ship or turn it or accelerate it or make use of any of its abilities, the process was the same as that of performing the analogous process to his body. He had but to use his will. Yet his will was not unalloyed. The computer itself could override. At the present moment, there was a formed sentence in his head, and he knew exactly when and how the ship would take off. There was no flexibility where that was concerned. Thereafter, he knew just as surely he would himself be able to decide. He found, as he cast the net of his computer-enhanced consciousness outward, that he could sense the condition of the upper atmosphere, that he could see the weather patterns. that he could detect the other ships that were swarming upward and the others that were settling downward. All of this had to be taken into account, and the computer was taking it into account. If the computer had not been doing so, Trevize realized, he need only desire the computer to do so, and it would be done. So much for the volumes of programming. There were none. Trevize thought of Technical Sergeant Krasnett and smiled. He had read often enough of the immense revolution that gravitics would make in the world, but the fusion of computer and mind was still a state secret. It would surely produce a still greater revolution. He was aware of time passing. He knew exactly what time it was by terminus local and by galactic standard. How did he let go? And even as the thought entered his mind, his hands were released, and the desktop moved back to its original position, and Trevize was left with his own unaided senses. He felt blind and helpless, as though for a time he had been held and protected by a super-being, and now was abandoned. Had he not known that he could make contact again at any time, the feeling might have reduced him to tears. As it was, he merely struggled for reorientation, for adjustment to limits, then rose uncertainly to his feet and walked out of the room. Pellerat looked up. He had adjusted his reader, obviously, and he said, "It works very well. It has an excellent search program. Did you find the controls, my boy?" "Yes, Professor. All is well." "In that case, shouldn't we do something about takeoff? I mean, self-protection? Aren't we supposed to strap ourselves in or something? I looked about for instructions, but I didn't find anything, and that made me nervous. I had to turn to my library. Somehow, when I am at my work..." Trevize had been pushing his hands at the professor as though to dam and stop the flood of words. Now he had to speak loudly in order to override him. "None of that is necessary, Professor. Anti-gravity is the equivalent of non-inertia. There is no feeling of acceleration when velocity changes, since everything on the ship undergoes the change simultaneously." "You mean we won't know when we are off the planet and out in space?" "It's exactly what I mean, because even as I speak to you, we have taken off. We will be cutting through the upper atmosphere in a very few minutes, and within half an hour we will be in outer space." 16. Pellerat seemed to shrink a little as he stared at Trevize. His long rectangle of a face grew so blank that, without showing any emotion at all, it radiated a vast uneasiness. Then his eyes shifted right, left. Trevize remembered how he had felt on his own first trip beyond the atmosphere. He said, in as matter-of-fact a manner as he could, "Janov," it was the first time he had addressed the professor familiarly, but in this case experience was addressing inexperience, and it was necessary to seem the older of the two. "We are perfectly safe here. We are in the metal womb of a warship of the Foundation Navy. We are not fully armed, but there is no place in the galaxy where the name of the Foundation will not protect us. Even if some ship went mad and attacked, we could move out of its reach in a moment, and I assure you I have discovered that I can handle the ship perfectly." Pellerat said, "It's the thought, Golan, of nothingness." "Why, there's nothingness all about Terminus. There's just a thin layer of very tenuous air between ourselves on the surface and the nothingness just above. All we're doing is to go past that inconsequential layer." "It may be inconsequential, but we breathe it." "We breathe here, too. The air on this ship is cleaner and purer, and will indefinitely remain cleaner and purer than the natural atmosphere of Terminus." "And the meteorites?" "What about meteorites?" "The atmosphere protects us from meteorites. Radiation, too, for that matter." Trevize said, "Humanity has been traveling through space for 20 millennia, I believe. 22. If we go by the Halblockian chronology, it is quite plain that Enough. Have you heard of meteorite accidents or of radiation deaths? I mean, recently? I mean, in the case of Foundation ships? I have not really followed the news in such matters, but I am a historian, my boy, and..." "Historically, yes, there have been such things. But technology improves. There isn't a meteorite large enough to damage us that can possibly approach us before we can take the necessary evasive action. 4 meteorites coming at us simultaneously from the 4 directions drawn from the vertices of a tetrahedron might conceivably pin us down. But calculate the chances of that, and you'll find that you'll die of old age a trillion times over before you will have a 50-50 chance of observing so interesting a phenomenon." "You mean if you were at the computer?" "No," said Trevize in scorn. "If I were running the computer on the basis of my own senses and responses, we would be hit before I ever knew what was happening. It's the computer itself that is at work, responding millions of times faster than you or I could." He held out his hand abruptly. "Janov, come, let me show you what the computer can do, and let me show you what space is like." Pellerat stared, goggling a bit. Then he laughed briefly. "I'm not sure I wish to know, Golan." Of course you're not sure, Janoff, because you don't know what it is that is waiting there to be known. Chance it. Come, into my room. Trevize held the other's hand, half leading him, half drawing him. He said as he sat down at the computer, "Have you ever seen the galaxy, Janoff? Have you ever looked at it?" Pellerat said, "You mean in the sky?" "Yes, certainly. Where else?" "I've seen it. Everyone has seen it. If one looks up, one sees it." "Have you ever stared at it on a dark, clear night when the diamonds are below the horizon?" The diamonds referred to those few stars that were luminous enough and close enough to shine with moderate brightness in the night sky of Terminus. They were a small group that spanned a width of no more than 20 degrees, and for large parts of the night they were all below the horizon. Aside from the group, there was a scattering of dim stars just barely visible to the unaided eye. There was nothing more but the faint milkiness of the galaxy, the view one might expect when one dwelt on a world like Terminus, which was at the extreme edge of the outermost spiral of the galaxy. "I suppose so, but why stare? It's a common sight." "Of course it's a common sight," said Trevize. "That's why no one sees it. Why see it if you can always see it? But now you'll see it, and not from Terminus, where the mist and the clouds are forever interfering. You'll see it as you'd never see it from Terminus, no matter how you stared, and no matter how clear and dark the night. How I wish I had never been in space before, so that, like you, I could see the galaxy in its bare beauty for the first time." He pushed a chair in Pellerat's direction. "Sit there, Janoff. This may take a little time. I have to continue to grow accustomed to the computer. From what I've already seen, I know the viewing is holographic, so we won't need a screen of any sort. It makes direct contact with my brain, but I think I can have it produce an objective image that you will see, too. Put out the light, will you?" "No, that's foolish of me. I'll have the computer do it. Stay where you are." Trevize made contact with the computer, holding hands warmly and intimately. The light dimmed, then went out completely, and in the darkness Pellerat stirred. Trevize said, "Don't get nervous, Janoff. I may have a little trouble trying to control the computer, but I'll start easy, and you'll have to be patient with me. Do you see it? The crescent?" It hung in the darkness before them, a little dim and wavering at first, but getting sharper and brighter. Pellerat's voice sounded odd. "Is that Terminus? Are we that far from it?" "Yes, the ship's moving quickly." The ship was curving into the night shadow of Terminus, which appeared as a thick crescent of bright light. Trevize had a momentary urge to send the ship in a wide arc that would carry them over the daylight side of the planet to show it in all its beauty, but he held back. Pellerat might find novelty in this, but the beauty would be tame. There were too many photographs, too many maps, too many globes. Every child knew what Terminus looked like. A water planet, more so than most, rich in water and poor in minerals, good in agriculture and poor in heavy industry, but the best in the galaxy in high technology and in miniaturization. If he could have the computer use microwaves and translate it into a visible model, they would see every one of Terminus's 10,000 inhabited islands, together with the only one of them large enough to be considered a continent, the one that bore Terminus City, and turn away. It was just a thought, an exercise of the will, but the view shifted at once. The lighted crescent moved off toward the borders of vision and rolled off the edge. The darkness of starless space filled his eyes. Pellerat cleared his throat. "I wish you would bring back Terminus, my boy. I feel as though I've been blinded." There was tightness in his voice. "You're not blind. Look." Into the field of vision came a filmy fog of pale translucence. It spread and became brighter until the whole room seemed to glow. Shrink. Another exercise of will, and the galaxy drew off, as though seen through a diminishing telescope that was steadily growing more powerful in its ability to diminish. The galaxy contracted and became a structure of varying luminosity. Brighten. It grew more luminous without changing size, and because the stellar system to which Terminus belonged was above the galactic plane, the galaxy was not seen exactly edge-on. It was a strongly foreshortened double spiral, with curving dark nebula rifts streaking the glowing edge of the Terminus side. The creamy haze in the nucleus, far off and shrunken by the distance, looked unimportant. Pellerat said in an awed whisper, "You are right. I have never seen it like this. I never dreamed it had so much detail." "How could you? You can't see the outer half when Terminus's atmosphere is between you and it. You can hardly see the nucleus from Terminus's surface." "What a pity we're seeing it so nearly head-on." "We don't have to. The computer can show it in any orientation. I just have to express the wish, and not even aloud. Shift coordinates." This exercise of will was by no means a precise command. Yet, as the image of the galaxy began to undergo a slow change, his mind guided the computer and had it do what he wished. Slowly, the galaxy was turning so that it could be seen at right angles to the galactic plane.
It spread out like a gigantic glowing whirlpool, with curves of darkness and knots of brightness, and a central all but featureless blaze. Pellerat asked, "How can the computer see it from a position in space that must be more than 50,000 parsecs from this place?" Then he added in a choked whisper, "Please forgive me that I ask. I know nothing about all this." Trevize said, "I know almost as little about this computer as you do. Even a simple computer, however, can adjust coordinates and show the galaxy in any position, starting with what it can sense in the natural position, the one, that is, that would appear from the computer's local position in space. Of course, it makes use only of the information it can sense to begin with, so when it changes to the broadside view, we would find gaps and blurs in what it would show. In this case, though, yes, we have an excellent view. I suspect that the computer is outfitted with a complete map of the galaxy and can, therefore, view it from any angle with equal ease." "How do you mean, a complete map?" "The spatial coordinates of every star in it must be in the computer's memory banks." "Every star?" Pellerat seemed awed. "Well, perhaps not all 300 billion. It would include the stars shining down on populated planets, certainly, and probably every star of spectral class K and brighter. That means about 75 billion at least." "Every star of a populated system?" "Well, I wouldn't want to be pinned down, perhaps not all. There were, after all, 25 million inhabited systems in the time of Harry Seldon, which sounds like a lot, but is only one star out of every 12,000. And then, in the 5 centuries since Seldon, the general breakup of the empire didn't prevent further colonization. I should think it would have encouraged it. There are still plenty of habitable planets to expand into, so there may be 30 million now. It's possible that not all the new ones are in the Foundation's records." "But the old ones? Surely they must all be there without exception." "I imagine so. I can't guarantee it, of course, but I would be surprised if any long-established inhabited system were missing from the records. Let me show you something, if my ability to control the computer will go far enough." Trevise's hands stiffened a bit with the effort, and they seemed to sink further into the clasp of the computer. That might not have been necessary. He might only have had to think quietly and casually, "Terminus." He did think that, and there was, in response, a sparkling red diamond at the very edge of the whirlpool. "There's our sun," he said with excitement. "That's the star that Terminus circles." "Ah," said Pellerat with a low, tremulous sigh. A bright yellow dot of light sprang into life in a rich cluster of stars deep in the heart of the galaxy, but well to one side of the central haze. It was rather closer to the terminus edge of the galaxy than to the other side. "And that," said Trevize, "is Trantor's sun." Another sigh. Then Pellerat said, "Are you sure? They always speak of Trantor as being located in the center of the galaxy." "It is, in a way. It's as close to the center as a planet can get and still be habitable. It's closer than any other major populated system. The actual center of the galaxy consists of a black hole with a mass of nearly 1,000,000 stars, so that the center is a violent place. As far as we know, there is no life in the actual center, and maybe there just can't be any life there. Trantor is in the innermost sub-ring of the spiral arms, and believe me, if you could see its night sky, you would think it was in the center of the galaxy. It's surrounded by an extremely rich clustering of stars." "Have you been on Trantor, Golan?" asked Pellerat in clear envy. "Actually, no, but I've seen holographic representations of its sky." Trevize stared at the galaxy somberly. In the great search for the Second Foundation during the time of the Mule, how everyone had played with galactic maps, and how many volumes had been written and filmed on the subject. And all because Harry Seldon had said at the beginning that the Second Foundation would be established at the other end of the galaxy, calling the place Star's End. At the other end of the galaxy, even as Trevize thought it, a thin blue line sprang into view, stretching from Terminus through the galaxy's central black hole to the other end. Trevize nearly jumped. He had not directly ordered the line, but he had thought of it quite clearly, and that had been enough for the computer. But of course, the straight-line route to the opposite side of the galaxy was not necessarily an indication of the other end that Seldon had spoken of. It was Arcady Durrell, if one could believe her autobiography, who had made use of the phrase, "a circle has no end," to indicate what everyone now accepted as truth. And though Trevize suddenly tried to suppress the thought, the computer was too quick for him. The blue line vanished and was replaced with a circle that neatly rimmed the galaxy in blue, and that passed through the deep red dot of Terminus's sun. A circle has no end. And if the circle began at Terminus, then if we searched for the other end, it would merely return to Terminus. And there the Second Foundation had indeed been found, inhabiting the same world as the first. But if in reality it had not been found, if the so-called finding of the Second Foundation had been an illusion, what then? What, beside a straight line and a circle, would make sense in this connection? Pellarat said. "Are you creating illusions? Why is there a blue circle?" "I was just testing my controls. Would you like to locate Earth?" There was silence for a moment or two. Then Pellarat said, "Are you joking?" "No, I'll try." He did. Nothing happened. "Sorry," said Trevize. "It's not there? No Earth?" "I suppose I might have misthought my command, but that doesn't seem likely. I suppose it's more likely that Earth isn't listed in the computer's vitals." Pellarat said, "It may be listed under another name." Trevize jumped at that quickly. "What other name, Janoff?" Pellarat said nothing, and in the darkness Trevize smiled. It occurred to him that things might just possibly be falling into place. Let it go for a while. Let it ripen. He deliberately changed the subject and said, "I wonder if we can manipulate time." "Time? How can we do that?" "The galaxy is rotating. It takes nearly 500 million years for Terminus to move about the grand circumference of the galaxy once. Stars that are closer to the center complete the journey much more quickly, of course. The motion of each star relative to the central black hole might be recorded in the computer, and if so, it may be possible to have the computer multiply each motion by millions of times and make the rotational effect visible. I can try to have it done." He did, and he could not help his muscles tightening with the effort of will he was exerting, as though he were taking hold of the galaxy and accelerating it, twisting it, forcing it to spin against terrible resistance. The galaxy was moving. Slowly, mightily, it was twisting in the direction that should be working to tighten the spiral arms. Time was passing incredibly rapidly as they watched, a false, artificial time, and as it did so, stars became evanescent things. Some of the larger ones, here and there, reddened and grew brighter as they expanded into red giants. And then a star in the central clusters blew up soundlessly in a blinding blaze that for a tiny fraction of a second dimmed the galaxy and then was gone. Then another in one of the spiral arms, then still another not very far away from it. "Supernovas," said Trevize a little shakily. Was it possible that the computer could predict exactly which stars would explode and when? Or was it just using a simplified model that served to show the starry future in general terms rather than precisely? Pellarat said in a husky whisper, "The galaxy looks like a living thing, crawling through space." "It does," said Trevize. "But I'm growing tired. Unless I learn to do this less tensely, I'm not going to be able to play this kind of game for long." He let go. The galaxy slowed, then halted, then tilted, until it was in the view from the side from which they had seen it at the start. Trevize closed his eyes and breathed deeply. He was aware of Terminus's shrinking behind them, with the last perceptible wisps of atmosphere gone from their surroundings. He was aware of all the ships filling Terminus's near space. It did not occur to him to check whether there was anything special about any one of those ships. Was there one that was gravitic like his own and matched his trajectory more closely than chance would allow? Chapter 5. Speaker. 17. Trantor. For 8,000 years, it was the capital of a large and mighty political entity that spanned an ever-growing union of planetary systems. For 12,000 years after that, it was the capital of a political entity that spanned the entire galaxy. It was the center, the heart, the epitome of the galactic empire. It was impossible to think of the empire without thinking of Trantor. Trantor did not reach its physical peak until the empire was far gone in decay. In fact, no one noticed that the empire had lost its drive, its forward look, because Trantor gleamed in shining metal. Its growth had peaked at the point where it was a planet-girdling city. Its population was stabilized by law at 45 billion, and the only surface greenery was at the Imperial Palace and the Galactic University Library Complex. Trantor's land surface was metal-coated. Its deserts and its fertile areas were alike engulfed and made into warrens of humanity, administrative jungles, computerized elaborations, vast storehouses of food and replacement parts. Its mountain ranges were beaten down, its chasms filled in. The city's endless corridors burrowed under the continental shelves, and the oceans were turned into huge underground aquaculture cisterns, the only, and insufficient, native source of food and minerals. The connections with the outer worlds from which Trantor obtained the resources it required depended upon its 1,000 spaceports, its 10,000 warships, its 100,000 merchant ships, its million space freighters. No city so vast was ever recycled so tightly. No planet in the galaxy had ever made so much use of solar power or went to such extremes to rid itself of waste heat. Glittering radiators stretched up into the thin upper atmosphere upon the night side and were withdrawn into the metal city on the day side. As the planet turned, the radiators rose as night progressively fell around the world and sank as day progressively broke. So Trantor always had an artificial asymmetry that was almost its symbol. At this peak, Trantor ran the Empire. It ran it poorly, but nothing could have run the Empire well. The Empire was too large to be run from a single world, even under the most dynamic of emperors. How could Trantor have helped but run it poorly, when in the ages of decay the imperial crown was traded back and forth by sly politicians and foolish incompetents, and the bureaucracy had become a subculture of corruptibles? But even at its worst, there was some self-propelled worth to the machinery. The Galactic Empire could not have been run without Trantor. The Empire crumbled steadily. But as long as Trantor remained Trantor, a core of the Empire remained, and it retained an air of pride, of millennia, of tradition and power and exaltation. Only when the unthinkable happened, when Trantor finally fell and was sacked, when its citizens were killed by the millions and left to starve by the billions, when its mighty metal coating was scarred and punctured and fused by the attack of the barbarian fleet, only then was the Empire considered to have fallen. The surviving remnants on the once great world undid further what had been left, and in a generation, Trantor was transformed from the greatest planet the human race had ever seen to an inconceivable tangle of ruins. That had been nearly 2.5 centuries ago. In the rest of the galaxy, Trantor as it had been still was not forgotten. It would live forever as the favored site of historical novels, the favored symbol and memory of the past, the favored word for saying such as, all starships land on Trantor, like looking for a person in Trantor, and no more alike than this and Trantor, in all the rest of the galaxy. But that was not true on Trantor itself. Here the old Trantor was forgotten. The surface metal was gone almost everywhere. Trantor was now a sparsely settled world of self-sufficient farmers, a place where trading ships rarely came, and were not particularly welcome when they did come. The very word Trantor, though still in official use, had dropped out of popular speech. By present-day Trantorians, it was called Heim, which in their dialect was what would have been called home in galactic standard. Kindor Shandus thought of all this, and much more, as he sat quietly in a welcome state of half-drowse, in which he could allow his mind to run along a self-propelled and unorganized stream of thought. He had been first speaker of the Second Foundation for 18 years, and he might well hold on for 10 or 12 years more if his mind remained reasonably vigorous and he could continue to fight the political wars. He was the analog, the mirror image of the mayor of Terminus, who ruled over the First Foundation. But how different they were in every respect. The mayor of Terminus was known to all the galaxy, and the First Foundation was therefore simply the Foundation to all the worlds. The first speaker of the Second Foundation was known only to his associates. And yet it was the Second Foundation, under himself and his predecessors, who held the real power. The First Foundation was supreme in the realm of physical power, of technology, of war weapons. The Second Foundation was supreme in the realm of mental power, of the mind, of the ability to control. In any conflict between the two, what would it matter how many ships and weapons the First Foundation disposed of if the Second Foundation could control the minds of those who controlled the ships and weapons? But how long could he revel in this realization of secret power? He was the 25th first speaker, and his incumbency was already a shade longer than average. Ought he perhaps not be too keen on holding on and keeping out the younger aspirants? There was Speaker Gendibal, the keenest and newest at the table. Tonight they would spend time together, and Shandus looked forward to it. Ought he look forward also to Gendibal's possible accession someday? The answer to the question was that Shandus had no real thought of leaving his post. He enjoyed it too much. He sat there, in his old age, still perfectly capable of performing his duties. His hair was gray, but it had always been light in color, and he wore it cut an inch long, so that the color scarcely mattered. His eyes were a faded blue, and his clothing conformed to the drab styling of the Trantorian farmers. The first speaker could, if he wished, pass among the Hamish people as one of them, but his hidden power nevertheless existed. He could choose to focus his eyes and mind at any time, and they would then act according to his will and recall nothing about it afterward. It rarely happened, almost never. The golden rule of the Second Foundation was, do nothing unless you must, and when you must act, hesitate. The first speaker sighed softly. Living in the old university with the brooding grandeur of the ruins of the imperial palace not too far distant made one wonder on occasion how golden the rule might be. In the days of the Great Sack, the golden rule had been strained to the breaking point. There was no way of saving Trantor without sacrificing the Selden plan for establishing a second empire. It would have been humane to spare the 45 billion, but they could not have been spared without retention of the core of the first empire, and that would have only delayed the reckoning. It would have led to a greater destruction some centuries later, and perhaps no second empire ever. The early first speakers had worked over the clearly foreseen sack for decades, but had found no solution, no way of assuring both the salvation of Trantor and the eventual establishment of the Second Empire. The lesser evil had to be chosen, and Trantor had died. The second foundationers of the time had managed, by the narrowest of margins, to save the university library complex, and there had been guilt forever after because of that, too. Though no one had ever demonstrated that saving the complex had led to the meteoric rise of the mule, there was always the intuition that there was a connection. How nearly that had wrecked everything. Yet following the decades of the sack and the mule came the golden age of the Second Foundation. Prior to that, for over 2.5 centuries after Selden's death, the Second Foundation had burrowed like moles into the library, intent only on staying out of the way of the Imperials. They served as librarians in a decaying society that cared less and less for the ever more misnamed Galactic Library, which fell into the desuetude that best suited the purpose of the Second Foundation. It was an ignoble life. They merely conserved the plan, while out at the end of the galaxy, the First Foundation fought for its life against always greater enemies, with neither help from the Second Foundation nor any real knowledge of it. It was the Great Sack that liberated the Second Foundation. Another reason, young Gendabal, who had courage, had recently said that it was the chief reason why the sack was allowed to proceed. After the Great Sack, the Empire was gone, and in all the later times the Trantorian survivors never trespassed on Second Foundation territory uninvited. The Second Foundationers saw to it that the University Library complex which had survived the sack also survived the Great Renewal. The ruins of the palace were preserved too. The metal was gone over almost all the rest of the world. The great and endless corridors were covered up, filled in, twisted, destroyed, ignored, all under rock and soil, all except here, where metal still surrounded the ancient open places. It might be viewed as a grand memorial of greatness, the sepulchre of empire, but to the Trantornians, the Hamish people, these were haunted places, filled with ghosts not to be stirred. Only the Second Foundationers ever set foot in the ancient corridors or touched the titanium gleam. And even so, all had nearly come to nothing because of the mule. The mule had actually been on Trantor. What if he had found out the nature of the world he had been standing on? His physical weapons were far greater than those at the disposal of the Second Foundation, his mental weapons almost as great. The Second Foundation would have been hampered always by the necessity of doing nothing but what they must, and by the knowledge that almost any hope of winning the immediate fight might portend a greater eventual loss. Had it not been for Beta Durrell and her swift moment of action, and that too had been without the help of the Second Foundation. And then, the Golden Age, when somehow the first speakers of the time found ways of becoming active, stopping the mule in his career of conquest, controlling his mind at last, and then stopping the First Foundation itself when it grew wary and over-curious concerning the nature and identity of the Second Foundation. There was Preem Palver, 19th First Speaker and greatest of them all, who had managed to put an end to all danger, not without terrible sacrifice, and who had rescued the Selden plan. Now, for 120 years, the Second Foundation was again as it once had been, hiding in a haunted portion of Trantor. They were hiding no longer from the Imperials, but from the First Foundation still, a First Foundation almost as large as the Galactic Empire had been, and even greater in technological expertise. The first speaker's eyes closed in the pleasant warmth, and he passed into that never-never state of relaxing, hallucinatory experiences that were not quite dreams and not quite conscious thought. Enough of gloom. All would be well. Trantor was still capital of the galaxy, for the Second Foundation was here, and it was mightier and more in control than ever the Emperor had been. The First Foundation would be contained and guided and would move correctly. However formidable their ships and weapons, they could do nothing as long as key leaders could be at need mentally controlled. Then the Second Empire would come, but it would not be like the First. It would be a federated empire, with its parts possessing considerable self-rule, so that there would be none of the apparent strength and actual weakness of a unitary, centralized government. The new empire would be looser, more pliant, more flexible, more capable of withstanding strain, and it would be guided always, always, by the hidden men and women of the Second Foundation. Trantor would then be still the capital, more powerful with its 40,000 psychohistorians than ever it had been with its 45 billion. The first speaker snapped awake. The sun was lower in the sky. Had he been mumbling? Had he said anything aloud? If the Second Foundation had to know much and say little, the ruling speakers had to know more and say less, and the first speaker had to know most and say least. He smiled wryly. It was always so tempting to become a Trantorian patriot, to see the whole purpose of the Second Empire as that of bringing about Trantorian hegemony. Selden had warned of it. He had foreseen even that 5 centuries before it could come to pass. The first speaker had not slept too long, however. It was not yet time for Gendabal's audience. Shandus was looking forward to that private meeting. Gendabal was young enough to look at the plan with new eyes, and keen enough to see what others might not, and it was not beyond possibility that Shandus would learn from what the youngster had to say. No one would ever be certain how much Preen Palver, the great Palver himself, had profited from that day when the young Cole Benjoam, not yet 30, came to talk to him about possible ways of handling the First Foundation. Benjoam, who was later recognized as the greatest theorist since Selden, never spoke of that audience in later years, but eventually he became the 21st first speaker. There were some who credited Benjoam rather than Palver for the great accomplishments of Palver's administration. Shandus amused himself with the thought of what Gendabal might say. It was traditional that keen youngsters, confronting the first speaker alone for the first time, would place their entire thesis in the first sentence. And surely they would not ask for that precious first audience for something trivial, something that might ruin their entire subsequent career by convincing the first speaker they were lightweights. 4 hours later, Gendabal faced him. The young man showed no sign of nervousness. He waited calmly for Shandus to speak first. Shandus said, "You have asked for a private audience, speaker, on a matter of importance. Could you please summarize the matter for me?" And Gendabal, speaking quietly, almost as though he were describing what he had just eaten at dinner, said, "First speaker, the Selden plan is meaningless." 18. Gendabal did not require the evidence of others to give him a sense of worth. He could not recall a time when he did not know himself to be unusual. He had been recruited for the Second Foundation when he was only a 10-year-old boy by an agent who had recognized the potentialities of his mind. He had then done remarkably well at his studies and had taken to psychohistory as a spaceship responds to a gravitational field. Psychohistory had pulled at him, and he had curved toward it, reading Selden's text on the fundamentals when others his age were merely trying to handle differential equations. When he was 15, he entered Trantor's Galactic University, as the University of Trantor had been officially renamed, after an interview during which, when asked what his ambitions were, he had answered firmly, "To be first speaker before I am 40. He had not bothered to aim for the first speaker's chair without qualification. To gain it one way or another seemed to him to be a certainty. It was to do it in youth that seemed to him to be the goal. Even Preen Palver had been 42 on his accession. The interviewer's expression had flickered when Gendabal had said that, but the young man already had the feeling of psycholanguage and could interpret that flicker. He knew as certainly as though the interviewer had announced it that a small notation would go on his records to the effect that he would be difficult to handle. Well, of course, Gendabal intended to be difficult to handle. He was 30 now. He would be 31 in a matter of 2 months, and he was already a member of the Council of Speakers. He had 9 years at most to become first speaker, and he knew he would make it. This audience with the present first speaker was crucial to his plans, and laboring to present precisely the proper impression, he had spared no effort to polish his command of psycholanguage. When 2 speakers of the Second Foundation communicate with each other, the language is like no other in the galaxy. It is as much a language of fleeting gestures as of words, as much a matter of detected mental change patterns as anything else. An outsider would hear little or nothing, but in a short time, much in the way of thought would be exchanged, and the communication would be unreportable in its literal form to anyone but still another speaker. The language of speakers had its advantage in speed and in infinite delicacy, but it had the disadvantage of making it almost impossible to mask true opinion. Gendabal knew his own opinion of the first speaker. He felt the first speaker to be a man past his mental prime. The first speaker, in Gendabal's assessment, expected no crisis, was not trained to meet one, and lacked the sharpness to deal with one if it appeared. With all Shandus's goodwill and amiability, he was the stuff of which disaster was made. All of this Gendabal had to hide, not merely from words, gestures, and facial expressions, but even from his thoughts. he knew no way of doing so efficiently enough to keep the first speaker from catching a whiff of it. Nor could Gendebal avoid knowing something of the first speaker's feeling toward him. Through bonhomie and goodwill, quite apparent and reasonably sincere, Gendebal could feel the distant edge of condescension and amusement, and tightened his own mental grip to avoid revealing any resentment in return, or as little as possible. The first speaker smiled and leaned back in his chair. He did not actually lift his feet to the desktop, but he got across just the right mixture of self-assured ease and informal friendship, just enough of each to leave Gendebal uncertain as to the effect of his statement. Since Gendebal had not been invited to sit down, the actions and attitudes available to him that might be designed to minimize the uncertainty were limited. It was impossible that the first speaker did not understand this. Chanda said, "The Selden plan is meaningless? What a remarkable statement. Have you looked at the prime radiant lately, Speaker Gendebal?" "I study it frequently, First Speaker. It is my duty to do so, and my pleasure as well." "Do you by any chance study only those portions of it that fall under your purview now and then? Do you observe it in micro-fashion? An equation system here, an adjustment rivulet there? Highly important, of course, but I have always thought it an excellent occasional exercise to observe the whole course. Studying the prime radiant, acre by acre, has its uses, but observing it as a continent is inspirational. To tell you the truth, Speaker, I have not done it for a long time myself. Would you join me?" Gendebal dared not pause too long. It had to be done, and it must be done easily and pleasantly, or it might as well not be done. "It would be an honor and a pleasure, First Speaker." The first speaker depressed a lever on the side of his desk. There was one such in the office of every speaker, and the one in Gendebal's office was no way inferior to that of the first speaker. The second foundation was an equalitarian society for all its surface manifestations, the unimportant ones. In fact, the only official prerogative of the first speaker was that which was implicit in his title. He always spoke first. The room grew dark with the depression of the lever, but almost at once the darkness lifted into a pearly dimness. Both long walls turned faintly creamy, then brighter and whiter, and finally there appeared neatly printed equations so small that they could not be easily read. "If you have no objections," said the first speaker, making it quite clear that there would be none allowed, "we will reduce the magnification in order to see as much at one time as we can." The neat printing shrank down into fine hairlines, faint black meanderings over the pearly background. The first speaker touched the keys of the small console built into the arm of his chair. "We'll bring it back to the start, to the lifetime of Harry Selden, and we'll adjust it to a small forward movement. We'll shutter it so that we can only see a decade of development at a time. It gives one a wonderful feeling of the flow of history, with no distractions by the details. I wonder if you have ever done this." "Never exactly this way, First Speaker." "You should. It's a marvelous feeling. Observe the sparseness of the black tracery at the start. There was not much chance for alternatives in the first few decades. The branch points, however, increase exponentially with time. Were it not for the fact that as soon as a particular branch is taken, there is an extinction of a vast array of others in its future, all would soon become unmanageable. Of course, in dealing with the future, we must be careful what extinctions we rely upon." "I know, First Speaker." There was a touch of dryness in Gendebal's response that he could not quite remove. The first speaker did not respond to it. "Notice the winding lines of symbols in red. There is a pattern to them. To all appearances, they should exist randomly, as every speaker earns his place by adding refinements to Selden's original plan. It would seem there is no way, after all, of predicting where a refinement can be added easily, or where a particular speaker will find his interests or his ability tending. And yet I have long suspected that the admixture of Selden black and speaker red follows a strict law that is strongly dependent on time and on very little else." Gendebal watched as the years passed, and as the black and red hairlines made an almost hypnotic interlacing pattern. The pattern meant nothing in itself, of course. What counted were the symbols of which it was composed. Here and there, a bright blue rivulet made its appearance, bellying out, branching and becoming prominent, then falling in upon itself and fading into the black or red. The first speaker said, "Deviation blue," and the feeling of distaste originating in each filled the space between them. "We catch it over and over, and we'll be coming to the century of deviations eventually." They did.
One could tell precisely when the shattering phenomenon of the mule momentarily filled the galaxy as the prime radiance suddenly grew thick with branching rivulets of blue, more starting than could be closed down, until the room itself seemed to turn blue as the lines thickened and marked the wall with brighter and brighter pollution. It was the only word. It reached its peak, and then faded, thinned, and came together for a long century before it trickled to its end at last. When it was gone, and when the plan had returned to black and red, it was clear that Prem Palver's hand had been there. Onward, onward. That's the present, said the first speaker comfortably. Onward, onward. Then the narrowing into a veritable knot of close-knit black with little red in it. That's the establishment of the Second Empire, said the first speaker. He shut off the prime radiant, and the room was bathed in ordinary light. Gendebal said, "That was an emotional experience." "Yes," smiled the first speaker, "and you are careful not to identify the emotion as far as you can manage to fail to identify it. It doesn't matter. Let me make the points I wish to make. You will notice first the all but complete absence of deviation blue after the time of Prem Palver, over the last 12 decades, in other words. You will notice that there are no reasonable probabilities of deviations above the 5th class over the next 5 centuries. You will notice, too, that we have begun extending the refinements of psychohistory beyond the establishment of the Second Empire. As you undoubtedly know, Harry Seldon, although a transcendent genius, is not and could not be all-knowing. We have improved on him. We know more about psychohistory than he could possibly have known. Seldon ended his calculations with the Second Empire, and we have continued beyond it. Indeed, if I may say so without offense, the new hyperplan that goes past the establishment of the Second Empire is very largely my doing and has earned me my present post. I tell you all this so that you can spare me unnecessary talk. With all this, how do you manage to conclude that the Seldon plan is meaningless? It is without flaw. The mere fact that it survived the century of deviations, with all due respect to Palver's genius, is the best evidence we have that it is without flaw. Where is its weakness, young man, that you should brand the plan as meaningless?" Gendebal stood stiffly upright. "You are right, First Speaker. The Seldon plan has no flaw." "You withdraw your remark, then?" "No, First Speaker. Its lack of flaw is its flaw. Its flawlessness is fatal." 19. The first speaker regarded Gendebal with equanimity. He had learned to control his expressions, and it amused him to watch Gendebal's ineptness in this respect. At every exchange, the young man did his best to hide his feelings, but each time he exposed them completely. Shandus studied him dispassionately. He was a thin young man, not much above the middle height, with thin lips and bony, restless hands. He had dark, humorless eyes that tended to smolder. He would be, the first speaker knew, a hard person to talk out of his convictions. "You speak in paradoxes, Speaker," he said. "It sounds like a paradox, First Speaker, because there is so much about Seldon's plan that we take for granted and accept in so unquestioning a manner." "And what is it you question, then?" "The plan's very basis. We all know that the plan will not work if its nature or even its existence is known to too many of those whose behavior it is designed to predict." "I believe Harry Seldon understood that. I even believe he made it one of his 2 fundamental axioms of psychohistory." "He did not anticipate the mule, First Speaker, and therefore he could not anticipate the extent to which the Second Foundation would become an obsession with the people of the First Foundation, once they had been shown its importance by the mule." "Harry Seldon—" And for one moment, the first speaker shuddered and fell silent. Harry Seldon's physical appearance was known to all the members of the Second Foundation. Reproductions of him in 2 and in 3 dimensions, photographic and holographic, in bas-relief and in the round, sitting and standing, were ubiquitous. They all represented him in the last few years of his life. All were of an old and benign man, face wrinkled with the wisdom of the aged, symbolizing the quintessence of well-ripened genius. But the first speaker now recalled seeing a photograph reputed to be Seldon as a young man. The photograph was neglected, since the thought of a young Seldon was almost a contradiction in terms. Yet Shandus had seen it, and the thought had suddenly come to him that Store Gendebal looked remarkably like the young Seldon. Ridiculous. It was the sort of superstition that afflicted everyone now and then, however rational they might be. He was deceived by a fugitive similarity. If he had the photograph before him, he would see at once that the similarity was an illusion. Yet why should that silly thought have occurred to him now? He recovered. It had been a momentary quaver, a transient derailment of thought, too brief to be noticed by anyone but a speaker. Gendebal might interpret it as he pleased. "Harry Seldon," he said very firmly the second time, knew well that there were an infinite number of possibilities he could not foresee, and it was for that reason that he set up the second foundation. We did not foresee the mule either, but we recognized him once he was upon us, and we stopped him. We did not foresee the subsequent obsession of the first foundation with ourselves, but we saw it when it came, and we stopped it. What is it about this that you can possibly find fault with?
For one thing, said Gendebal, the obsession of the first foundation with us is not yet over. There was a distinct ebb in the deference with which Gendebal had been speaking. He had noted the quaver in the first speaker's voice, Shandus decided, and he had interpreted it as uncertainty. That had to be countered. The first speaker said briskly, "Let me anticipate. There would be people on the first foundation who, comparing the hectic difficulties of the first nearly 4 centuries of existence with the placidity of the last 12 decades, will come to the conclusion that this cannot be unless the second foundation is taking good care of the plan. And of course they will be right in so concluding. They will decide that the second foundation may not have been destroyed after all. And of course they will be right in so deciding. In fact, we've received reports that there is a young man on the First Foundation's capital world of Terminus, an official of their government, who is quite convinced of all this. I forget his name."
"Golan Trevize," said Gendebal softly. "It was I who first noted the matter in the reports, and it was I who directed the matter to your office."
"Oh?" said the first speaker with exaggerated politeness. "And how did your attention come to be focused on him?"
"One of our agents on Terminus sent in a tedious report on the newly elected members of their council, a perfectly routine matter usually sent to and ignored by all speakers. This one caught my eye because of the nature of the description of one new councilman, Golan Trevize. From the description he seemed unusually self-assured and combative."
"You recognized a kindred spirit, did you?"
"Not at all," said Gendebal stiffly. "He seemed a reckless person who enjoyed doing ridiculous things, a description which does not apply to me. In any case, I directed an in-depth study. It did not take long for me to decide that he would have made good material for us if he had been recruited at an early age."
"Perhaps," said the first speaker, "but you know that we do not recruit on Terminus."
"I know that well. In any case, even without our training, he has an unusual intuition. It is, of course, thoroughly undisciplined. I was therefore not particularly surprised that he had grasped the fact that the second foundation still exists. I felt it important enough, however, to direct a memo on the matter to your office."
"And I take it from your manner that there is a new development."
Having grasped the fact that we still exist, thanks to his highly developed intuitive abilities, he then used it in a characteristically undisciplined fashion, and has, as a result, been exiled from Terminus.
The first speaker lifted his eyebrows. "You stop suddenly. You want me to interpret the significance. Without using my computer, let me mentally apply a rough approximation of Selden's equations and guess that a shrewd mayor, capable of suspecting that the second foundation exists, prefers not to have an undisciplined individual shout it to the galaxy and thus alert said second foundation to the danger. I take it Branno the Bronze decided that Terminus is safer with Trevize off the planet."
"She might have imprisoned Trevize or had him quietly assassinated."
"The equations are not reliable when applied to individuals, as you well know. They deal only with humanity in mass. Individual behavior is therefore unpredictable, and it is possible to assume that the mayor is a humane individual who feels imprisonment, let alone assassination, is unmerciful."
Gendebal said nothing for a while. It was an eloquent nothing, and he maintained it just long enough for the first speaker to grow uncertain of himself, but not so long as to induce a defensive anger. He timed it to the second, and then he said, "That is not my interpretation. I believe that Trevize at this moment represents the cutting edge of the greatest threat to the second foundation in its history, a greater danger even than the mule." 20. Gendebal was satisfied. The force of the statement had worked well. The first speaker had not expected it and was caught off balance. From this moment the whip hand was Gendebal's. If he had any doubt of that at all, it vanished with Shandus' next remark.
"Does this have anything to do with your contention that Selden's plan is meaningless?"
Gendebal gambled on complete certainty, driving in with a didacticism that would not allow the first speaker to recover. He said, "First speaker, it is an article of faith that it was Preen Palver who restored the plan to its course after the wild aberrance of the century of deviations. Study the prime radiant, and you will see that the deviations did not disappear till 2 decades after Palver's death, and that not one deviation has appeared since. The credit might rest with the first speaker since Palver, but that is improbable."
"Improbable? Granted, none of us have been Palvers, but why improbable?"
Will you allow me to demonstrate, first speaker?
Using the mathematics of psychohistory, I can clearly show that the chances of total disappearance of deviation are too microscopically small to have taken place through anything the second foundation can do. You need not allow me if you lack the time or the desire for the demonstration, which will take half an hour of close attention. I can, as an alternative, call for a full meeting of the speaker's table and demonstrate it there, but that would mean a loss of time for me and unnecessary controversy.
Yes, and a possible loss of face for me. Demonstrate the matter to me now. But a word of warning.
The first speaker was making a heroic effort to recover.
If what you show me is worthless, I will not forget that.
If it proves worthless, said Gendebal with an effortless pride that overrode the other, you will have my resignation on the spot. It took actually considerably more than half an hour, for the first speaker questioned the mathematics with near savage intensity. Gendebal made up some of the time by his smooth use of his micro-radiant, the device which could locate any portion of the vast plan holographically, and which required neither wall nor desk-sized console, had come into use only a decade ago, and the first speaker had never learned the knack of handling it. Gendebal was aware of that. The first speaker knew that he was. Gendebal hooked it over his right thumb and manipulated its controls with his 4 fingers, using his hand deliberately as though it were a musical instrument. Indeed, he had written a small paper on the analogies. The equations Gendebal produced, and found with sure ease, moved back and forth snakily to accompany his commentary. He could obtain definitions if necessary, set up axioms, and produce graphics both 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional, to say nothing of projections of multidimensional relationships. Gendebal's commentary was clear and incisive, and the first speaker abandoned the game. He was won over and said, "I do not recall having seen an analysis of this nature. Whose work is it?" "First speaker, it is my own. I have published the basic mathematics involved." "Very clever, Speaker Gendebal. Something like this will put you in line for the first speakership, should I die or retire." "I have given that matter no thought, first speaker, but since there is no chance of your believing that, I withdraw the comment. I have given it thought, and I hope I will be first speaker, since whoever succeeds to the post must follow a procedure that only I see clearly." "Yes," said the first speaker. "Inappropriate modesty can be very dangerous." "What procedure?" "Perhaps the present first speaker may follow it too. If I am too old to have made the creative leap you have, I am not so old that I cannot follow your direction." It was a graceful surrender, and Gendebal's heart warmed rather unexpectedly toward the older man, even as he realized that this was precisely the first speaker's intention. "Thank you, first speaker, for I will need your help badly. I cannot expect to sway the table without your enlightened leadership." Grace for grace. "I assume, then, that you have already seen from what I have demonstrated that it is impossible for the century of deviations to have been corrected under our policies, or for all deviations to have ceased since then." "This is clear to me," said the first speaker. "If your mathematics is correct, then in order for the plan to have recovered as it did and to work as perfectly as it seems to be working, it would be necessary for us to be able to predict the reactions of small groups of people, even of individuals, with some degree of assurance." "Quite so. Since the mathematics of psychohistory does not allow this, the deviations should not have vanished, and, even more so, should not have remained absent. You see, then, what I meant when I said earlier that the flaw in the Selden plan was its flawlessness." The first speaker said, "Either the Selden plan does possess deviations, then, or there is something wrong in your mathematics. Since I must admit that the Selden plan has not shown deviations in a century and more, it follows that there is something wrong with your mathematics, except that I detected no fallacies or missteps." "You do wrong," said Gendebal, "to exclude a third alternative. It is quite possible for the Selden plan to possess no deviations, and yet for there to be nothing wrong in my mathematics when it predicts that to be impossible." "I fail to see the third alternative." "Suppose the Selden plan is being controlled by means of a psychohistorical method so advanced that the reactions of small groups of people, even perhaps of individual persons, can be predicted, a method that we of the second foundation do not possess. Then, and only then, my mathematics would predict that the Selden plan should indeed experience no deviations." For a while, by second foundation standards, the first speaker made no response. He said, "There is no such advanced psychohistorical method that is known to me, or I am certain from your manner to you. If you and I know of none, the chance that any other speaker, or any group of speakers, has developed such a micro-psychohistory, if I may call it that, and has kept it secret from the rest of the table is infinitesimally small. Don't you agree?" "I agree." "Then,
Either your analysis is wrong, or else micropsychohistory is in the hands of some group outside the Second Foundation.
Exactly, First Speaker. The latter alternative must be correct.
Can you demonstrate the truth of such a statement?
I cannot in any formal way, but consider. Has there not already been a person who could affect the Selden plan by dealing with individual people?
I presume you are referring to the mule.
Yes, certainly.
The mule could only disrupt. The problem here is that the Selden plan is working too well, considerably closer to perfection than your mathematics would allow. You would need an anti-mule, someone who is as capable of overriding the plan as the mule was, but who acts for the opposite motive, overriding not to disrupt, but to perfect.
Exactly, First Speaker. I wish I had thought of that expression. What was the mule? A mutant. But where did he come from? How did he come to be? No one really knows. Might there not be more?
Apparently not. The one thing that is best known about the mule is that he was sterile, hence his name. Or do you think that is a myth?
I am not referring to descendants of the mule. Might it not be that the mule was an aberrant member of what is, or has now become, a sizable group of people with mulish powers, who for some reason of their own are not disrupting the Selden plan, but supporting it?
Why in the galaxy should they support it?
Why do we support it? We plan a second empire in which we, or rather our intellectual descendants, will be the decision-makers. If some other group is supporting the plan even more efficiently than we are, they cannot be planning to leave the decision-making to us. They will make the decisions. But to what end? Ought we not try to find out what kind of a second empire they are sweeping us into?
And how do you propose to find out?
Well, why has the mayor of Terminus exiled Golan Trevize? By doing so, she allows a possibly dangerous person to move freely about the galaxy. That she does it out of motives of humanity, I cannot believe. Historically, the rulers of the First Foundation have always acted realistically, which means usually without regard for morality. One of their heroes, Selver Hardin, counseled against morality, in fact. No, I think the mayor acted under compulsion from agents of the anti-mules, to use your phrase. I think Trevize has been recruited by them, and I think he is the spearhead of danger to us. Deadly danger.
And the First Speaker said, By Selden, you may be right. But how will we ever convince the table of this?
First Speaker, you underestimate your eminence. Chapter 6. Earth. 21. Trevize was hot and annoyed. He and Pellerat were sitting in the small dining area, having just completed their midday meal. Pellerat said, We've only been in space 2 days, and I find myself quite comfortable, although I miss fresh air, nature, and all that. Strange. Never seemed to notice all that sort of thing when it was all around me. Still, between my wafer and that remarkable computer of yours, I have my entire library with me, or all that matters at any rate, and I don't feel the least bit frightened of being out in space now. Astonishing. Trevize made a non-committal sound. His eyes were inwardly focused. Pellerat said gently, I don't mean to intrude, Golan, but I don't really think you're listening. Not that I'm a particularly interesting person, always been a bit of a bore, you know. Still, you seem preoccupied in another way. Are we in trouble? Needn't be afraid to tell me, you know. Not much I could do, I suppose, but I won't go into panic, dear fellow. In trouble? Trevize seemed to come to his senses, frowning slightly. I mean the ship. It's a new model, so I suppose there could be something wrong. Pellerat allowed himself a small, uncertain smile. Trevize shook his head vigorously. Stupid of me to leave you in such uncertainty, Jenoff. There's nothing wrong at all with the ship. It's working perfectly. It's just that I've been looking for a hyper-relay. Ah, I see. Except that I don't. What is a hyper-relay? Well, let me explain, Jenoff. I am in communication with Terminus. At least I can be any time I wish, and Terminus can in reverse be in communication with us. They know the ship's location, having observed its trajectory. Even if they had not, they could locate us by scanning near space for mass, which would warn them of the presence of a ship or possibly a meteoroid. But they could further detect an energy pattern, which would not only distinguish a ship from a meteoroid, but would identify a particular ship, for no two ships make use of energy in quite the same way. In some way, our pattern remains characteristic, no matter what appliances or instruments we turn on and off. The ship may be unknown, of course, but if it is a ship whose energy pattern is on record in Terminus, as ours is, it can be identified as soon as detected. Pellerat said, It seems to me, Golan, that the advance of civilization is nothing but an exercise in the limiting of privacy. You may be right. Sooner or later, however, we must move through hyperspace, or we will be condemned to remain within a parsec or two of Terminus for the rest of our lives.
We will then be unable to engage in interstellar travel to any but the slightest degree. In passing through hyperspace, on the other hand, we undergo a discontinuity in ordinary space. We pass from here to there, and I mean across a gap of hundreds of parsecs sometimes, in an instant of experienced time. We are suddenly enormously far away, in a direction that is very difficult to predict, and in a practical sense, we can no longer be detected. I see that, yes. Unless, of course, they have planted a hyper-relay on board. A hyper-relay sends out a signal through hyperspace, a signal characteristic of this ship, and the authorities on Terminus would know where we are at all times. That answers your question, you see. There would be nowhere in the galaxy we could hide, and no combination of jumps through hyperspace would make it possible for us to evade their instruments. But Golan, said Pellerat softly, don't we want Foundation protection? Yes, Janov, but only when we ask for it. You said the advance of civilization meant the continuing restriction of privacy. Well, I don't want to be that advanced. I want freedom to move undetected as I wish, unless and until I want protection. So I would feel better, a great deal better, if there weren't a hyper-relay on board. Have you found one, Golan? No, I have not. If I had, I might be able to render it inoperative somehow. Would you know one if you saw it? That's one of the difficulties. I might not be able to recognize it. I know what a hyper-relay looks like generally, and I know ways of testing a suspicious object, but this is a late-model ship designed for special tasks. A hyper-relay may have been incorporated into its design in such a way as to show no signs of its presence. On the other hand, maybe there is no hyper-relay present, and that's why you haven't found it. I don't dare assume that, and I don't like the thought of making a jump until I know. Pellerat looked enlightened. That's why we've just been drifting through space. I've been wondering why we haven't jumped. I've heard about jumps, you know. Been a little nervous about it, actually. Been wondering when you'd order me to strap myself in or take a pill or something like that. Trevize managed to smile. No need for apprehension. These aren't ancient times. On a ship like this, you just leave it all to the computer. You give it your instructions, and it does the rest. You won't know that anything has happened at all, except that the view of space will suddenly change. If you've ever seen a slideshow, you'll know what happens when one slide is suddenly projected in place of another. Well, that's what the jump will seem like. Dear me, one won't feel anything? Odd. I find that somewhat disappointing. I've never felt anything, and the ships I've been in haven't been as advanced as this baby of ours. But it's not because of the hyper-relay that we haven't jumped. We have to get a bit further away from Terminus, and from the sun, too. The farther we are from any massive object, the easier to control the jump, to make re-emergence into space at exactly desired coordinates. In an emergency, you might risk a jump when you're only 200 kilometers off the surface of a planet, and just trust to luck that you'll end up safely. Since there is much more safe than unsafe volume in the galaxy, you can reasonably count on safety. Still, there's always the possibility that random factors will cause you to re-emerge within a few million kilometers of a large star, or in the galactic core, and you will find yourself fried before you can blink. The further away you are from mass, the smaller those factors, and the less likely it is that anything untoward will happen. In that case, I commend your caution. We're not in a tearing hurry. Exactly. Especially since I would dearly love to find the hyper-relay before I make a move, or find a way of convincing myself there is no hyper-relay. Trevize seemed to drift off again into his private concentration, and Pellerat said, raising his voice a little to surmount the preoccupation barrier, How much longer do we have? What? I mean, when would you make the jump if you had no concerns over the hyper-relay, my dear chap? At our present speed and trajectory, I should say on our 4th day out. I'll work out the proper time on the computer. Well, then, you still have 2 days for your search. May I make a suggestion? Go ahead. I have always found in my own work, quite different from yours, of course, but possibly we may generalize, that zeroing in tightly on a particular problem is self-defeating. Why not relax and talk about something else, and your unconscious mind, not laboring under the weight of concentrated thought, may solve the problem for you. Trevize looked momentarily annoyed and then laughed. Well, why not? Tell me, Professor, what got you interested in Earth? What brought up this odd notion of a particular planet from which we all started? Ah, Pellerat nodded his head reminiscently. That's going back a while, over 30 years. I planned to be a biologist when I was going to college. I was particularly interested in the variation of species on different worlds. The variation, as you know, well, maybe you don't know, so you won't mind if I tell you, is very small. All forms of life throughout the galaxy, at least all that we have yet encountered, share a water-based protein nucleic acid chemistry. Trevize said, I went to military college, which emphasized nucleonics and gravitics, but I'm not exactly a narrow specialist.
I know a bit about the chemical basis of life. We were taught that water, proteins, and nucleic acids are the only possible basis for life. That, I think, is an unwarranted conclusion. It is safer to say that no other form of life has yet been found, or at any rate been recognized, and let it go at that. What is more surprising is that indigenous species, that is, species found on only a single planet and no other, are few in number. Most of the species that exist, including Homo sapiens in particular, are distributed through all or most of the inhabited worlds of the galaxy and are closely related biochemically, physiologically, and morphologically. The indigenous species, on the other hand, are widely separated in characteristics from both the widespread forms and from each other. Well, what of that? The conclusion is that one world in the galaxy, one world, is different from the rest. Tens of millions of worlds in the galaxy, no one knows exactly how many, have developed life. It was simple life, sparse life, feeble life, not very variegated, not easily maintained, and not easily spread. One world alone, developed life in millions of species, easily millions, some of it very specialized, highly developed, very prone to multiplication and to spreading, and including us. We were intelligent enough to form a civilization, to develop hyperspatial flight, and to colonize the galaxy. And in spreading through the galaxy, we took many other forms of life, forms related to each other and to ourselves, along with us. If you stop to think of it, said Trevize rather indifferently, I suppose that stands to reason. I mean, here we are in a human galaxy. If we assume that it all started on some one world, then that one world would have to be different. But why not? The chances of life developing in that riotous fashion must be very slim indeed, perhaps 1 in 100 million. So the chances are that it happened on one life-bearing world out of 100 million. It had to be one. But what is it that made that particular one world so different from the others, said Pellerat excitedly. What were the conditions that made it unique? Merely chance, perhaps. After all, human beings and the life forms they brought with them now exist on tens of millions of planets, all of which can support life, so all those worlds must be good enough. No. Once the human species had evolved, once it had developed a technology, once it had toughened itself in the hard struggle for survival, it could then adapt to life on any world that is in the least hospitable, on Terminus, for instance. But can you imagine intelligent life having developed on Terminus? When Terminus was first occupied by human beings in the days of the encyclopedists, the highest form of plant life it produced was a moss-like growth on rocks. The highest forms of animal life were small coral-like growths in the ocean and insect-like flying organisms on land. We just about wiped them out and stocked sea and land with fish and rabbits and goats and grass and grain and trees and so on. We have nothing left of the indigenous life except for what exists in zoos and aquaria. Said Trevize. Pellerat stared at him for a full minute, then sighed and said, You don't really care, do you? Remarkable. I find no one who does, somehow. My fault, I think. I cannot make it interesting, even though it interests me so much. Trevize said, It's interesting, it is. But so what? It doesn't strike you that it might be interesting, scientifically, to study a world that gave rise to the only really flourishing indigenous ecological balance the galaxy has ever seen? Maybe, if you're a biologist. I'm not, you see. You must forgive me. Of course, dear fellow. It's just that I never found any biologists who were interested either. I told you I was a biology major. I took it up with my professor, and he wasn't interested. He told me to turn to some practical problem. That so disgusted me I took up history instead, which had been rather a hobby of mine from my teenage years in any case, and tackled the origin question from that angle. Trevize said, But at least it's given you a life work, so you must be pleased that your professor was so unenlightened. Yes, I suppose one might look at it that way. And the life work is an interesting one, of which I have never tired. But I do wish it interested you. I hate this feeling of forever talking to myself. Trevize leaned his head back and laughed heartily. Pellerat's quiet face took on a trace of hurt. Why are you laughing at me? Not you, Janov, said Trevize. I was laughing at my own stupidity. Where you're concerned, I'm completely grateful. You were perfectly right, you know. To take up the importance of human origins? Oh, no. Well, yes, that too. But I meant you were right to tell me to stop consciously thinking of my problem and to turn my mind elsewhere. It worked. When you were talking about the manner in which life evolved, it finally occurred to me that I knew how to find that hyperrelay, if it existed. Oh, that. Yes, that. That's my monomania at the moment. I've been looking for that hyper-relay as though I were on my old scow of a training ship, studying every part of the ship by eye, looking for something that stood out from the rest. I had forgotten that this ship is a developed product of thousands of years of technological evolution. Don't you see? No, Golan. We have a computer aboard. How could I have forgotten? He waved his hand and passed into his own room, urging Pellerat along with him. I need only try to communicate, he said, placing his hands onto the computer contact. It was a matter of trying to reach Terminus, which was now some thousands of kilometers behind. Reach. Speak. It was as though nerve endings sprouted and extended, reaching outward with bewildering speed, the speed of light, of course, to make contact. Trevize felt himself touching. Well, not quite touching, but sensing. Well, not quite sensing. But it didn't matter, for there wasn't a word for it. He was aware of Terminus within reach, and although the distance between himself and it was lengthening by some 20 kilometers per second, contact persisted as though planet and ship were motionless and separated by a few meters. He said nothing. He clamped shut. He was merely testing the principle of communication. He was not actively communicating. Out beyond, 8 parsecs away, was Anacreon, the nearest large planet, in their backyard by galactic standards. To send a message by the same lightspeed system that had just worked for Terminus, and to receive an answer as well, would take 52 years. Reach for Anacreon. Think Anacreon. Think it as clearly as you can. You know its position relative to Terminus and the galactic core. You've studied its planetography and history. You've solved military problems where it was necessary to recapture Anacreon, in the impossible case these days that it was taken by an enemy. Space, you've been on Anacreon. Picture it. Picture it. You will sense being on it via hyper-relay. Nothing. His nerve endings quivered and came to rest nowhere. Trevize pulled loose. There's no hyper-relay on board the Far Star, Janov, I'm positive. And if I hadn't followed your suggestion, I wonder how long it would have taken me to reach this point. Pellerat, without moving a facial muscle, positively glowed. I'm so pleased to have been of help. Does this mean we jump? No, we still wait 2 more days to be safe. We have to get away from mass, remember? Ordinarily, considering that I have a new and untried ship with which I am thoroughly unacquainted, it would probably take me 2 days to calculate the exact procedure, the proper hyperthrust for the first jump in particular. I have a feeling, though, the computer will do it all. Dear me, that leaves us facing a rather boring stretch of time, it seems to me. Boring? Trevize smiled broadly. Anything but. You and I, Janov, are going to talk about Earth. Pellerat said, Indeed? You are trying to please an old man? That is kind of you, really it is. Nonsense. I'm trying to please myself. Janov, you have made a convert. As a result of what you have told me, I realize that Earth is the most important and most devouringly interesting object in the universe. 22. It must surely have struck Trevize at the moment that Pellerat had presented his view of Earth. It was only because his mind was reverberating with the problem of the hyper-relay that he hadn't responded at once, and the instant the problem had gone, he had responded. Perhaps the one statement of Harry Seldon's that was most often repeated was his remark concerning the second foundation being at the other end of the galaxy from Terminus. Seldon had even named the spot. It was to be at Star's End. This had been included in Gail Dornick's account of the day of the trial before the Imperial Court. The other end of the galaxy, those were the words Seldon had used to Dornick, and ever since that day their significance had been debated. What was it that connected one end of the galaxy with the other end? Was it a straight line, a spiral, a circle, or what? And now, luminously, it was suddenly clear to Trevize that it was no line and no curve that should or could be drawn on the map of the galaxy. It was more subtle than that. It was perfectly clear that the one end of the galaxy was Terminus. It was at the edge of the galaxy, yes, our foundation's edge, which gave the word end a literal meaning. It was, however, also the newest world of the galaxy at the time Seldon was speaking, a world that was about to be founded, that had not as yet been in existence for a single moment. What would be the other end of the galaxy in that light, the other foundation's edge? Why, the oldest world of the galaxy. And according to the argument Pellerat had presented, without knowing what he was presenting, that could only be Earth. The second foundation might well be on Earth. Yet Seldon had said the other end of the galaxy was at Star's End. Who could say he was not speaking metaphorically? Trace the history of humanity backward as Pellerat did, and the line would stretch back from each planetary system, each star that shone down on an inhabited planet, to some other planetary system, some other star from which the first migrants had come, then back to a star before that, until finally all the lines stretched back to the planet on which humanity had originated. It was the star that shone upon Earth that was Star's End. Trevize smiled and said almost lovingly, "Tell me more about Earth, Janov." Ballarat shook his head. "I have told you all there is, really. We will find out more on Trantor." Trevize said, "No, we won't, Janov. We'll find out nothing there. Why? Because we're not going to Trantor. I control this ship, and I assure you we're not." Ballarat's mouth fell open. He struggled for breath for a moment and then said, "Woe begone." "Oh, my dear fellow." Trevize said, "Come on, Janov, don't look like that. We're going to find Earth." "But it's only on Trantor that—" "No, it's not. Trantor is just some place you can study brittle films and dusty documents and turn brittle and dusty yourself. For decades I've dreamed—" "You've dreamed of finding Earth. But it's only—" Trevize stood up, leaned over, caught the slack of Ballarat's tunic and said, "Don't repeat that, Professor. Don't repeat it. When you first told me we were going to look for Earth before ever we got onto the ship, you said we were sure to find it because, and I quote your own words, I have an excellent possibility in mind. Now, I don't ever want to hear you say Trantor again. I just want you to tell me about this excellent possibility." "But it must be confirmed. So far, it's only a thought, a hope, a vague possibility." "Good. Tell me about it." "You don't understand. You simply don't understand. It is not a field in which anyone but myself has done research. There is nothing historical, nothing firm, nothing real. People talk about Earth as though it's a fact, and also as though it's a myth. There are a million contradictory tales." "Well then, what has your research consisted of?" "I've been forced to collect every tale, every bit of supposed history, every legend, every misty myth, even fiction. Anything that includes the name of Earth or the idea of a planet of origin. For over 30 years, I've been collecting everything I could find from every planet of the galaxy. Now, if I could only get something more reliable than all of these from the Galactic Library, But you don't want me to say the word." "That's right. Don't say it. Tell me instead that one of these items has caught your attention, and tell me your reasons for thinking why it of them all should be legitimate." Ballarat shook his head. "There, Golan, if you will excuse my saying so, you talk like a soldier or a politician. That's not the way history works." Trevize took a deep breath and kept his temper. "Tell me how it works, Janov. We've got 2 days. Educate me." "You can't rely on any one myth, or even on any one group. I've had to gather them all, analyze them, organize them, set up symbols to represent different aspects of their content, tales of impossible weather, astronomic details of planetary systems at variance with what actually exists, place of origin of culture heroes specifically stated not to be native, quite literally hundreds of other items. No use going through the entire list. Even 2 days wouldn't be enough. I've spent over 30 years, I tell you. I then worked up a computer program that searched through all these myths for common components and sought a transformation that would eliminate the true impossibilities. Gradually, I worked up a model of what Earth must have been like. After all, if human beings all originated on a single planet, that single planet must represent the one fact that all original myths, all culture hero tales have in common. Well, do you want me to go into mathematical detail?" Trevize said, "Not at the moment, thank you. But how do you know you won't be misled by your mathematics? We know for a fact that Terminus was founded only 5 centuries ago, and that the first human beings arrived as a colony from Trantor, but had been assembled from dozens, if not hundreds, of other worlds. Yet someone who did not know this could assume that Harry Seldon and Salver Hardin, neither of whom were born on Terminus, came from Earth, and that Trantor was really a name that stood for Earth. Certainly, if the Trantor, as described in Seldon's time, were searched for a world with all its land surface coated with metal, it would not be found, and it might be considered an impossible myth." Ballarat looked pleased. "I withdraw my earlier remark about soldiers and politicians, my dear fellow. You have a remarkable intuitive sense. Of course, I had to set up controls. I invented 100 falsities based on distortions of actual history and imitating myths of the type I had collected. I then attempted to incorporate my inventions into the model. One of my inventions was even based on Terminus's early history. The computer rejected them all, every one. To be sure, that might have meant I simply lacked the fictional talents to make up something reasonable, but I did my best." "I'm sure you did, Janov. And what did your model tell you about Earth?" "A number of things of varying degrees of likelihood. A kind of profile. For instance, about 90% of the inhabited planets in the galaxy have rotation periods of between 22 and 26 galactic standard hours. Well," Trevize cut in, "I hope you didn't pay any attention to that, Janov. There's no mystery there.
For a planet to be habitable, you don't want it to rotate so quickly that air circulation patterns produce impossibly stormy conditions, or so slowly that temperature variation patterns are extreme. It's a property that's self-selective. Human beings prefer to live on planets with suitable characteristics, and then when all habitable planets resemble each other in these characteristics, some say, "What an amazing coincidence," when it's not amazing at all and not even a coincidence.
As a matter of fact, said Pellerat calmly, that's a well-known phenomenon in social science. In physics, too, I believe, but I'm not a physicist, and I'm not certain about that. In any case, it is called the anthropic principle. The observer influences the events he observes by the mere act of observing them, or by being there to observe them. But the question is, where is the planet that's served as a model? Which planet rotates in precisely one galactic standard day of 24 galactic standard hours? Trevize looked thoughtful and thrust out his lower lip. You think that might be Earth? Surely galactic standard could have been based on the local characteristics of any world, might it not? Not likely. It's not the human way. Tretor was the capital world of the galaxy for 12,000 years, the most populous world for 20,000 years, yet it did not impose its rotation period of 1.08 galactic standard days on all the galaxy. And Terminus's rotation period is 0.91 GSD, and we don't enforce ours on the planets dominated by us. Every planet makes use of its own private calculations in its own local planetary day system, and for matters of interplanetary importance converts, with the help of computers, back and forth between LPD and GSD. The galactic standard day must have come from Earth. Why is it a must? For one thing, Earth was once the only inhabited world. So, naturally, its day and year would be standard, and would very likely remain standard out of social inertia as other worlds were populated. Then, too, the model I produced was that of an Earth that rotated on its axis in just 24 galactic standard hours, and that revolved about its sun in just one galactic standard year. Might that not be coincidence? Pellerat laughed. Now it is you who are talking coincidence. Would you care to lay a wager on such a thing happening by coincidence? Well, well, muttered Trevize. In fact, there's more to it. There's an archaic measure of time that's called the month. I've heard of it. It apparently about fits the period of revolution of Earth's satellite about Earth. However, yes, well, one rather astonishing factor of the model is that the satellite I just mentioned is huge, over 1/4 the diameter of the Earth itself. Never heard of such a thing, Janov. There isn't a populated planet in the galaxy with a satellite like that. But that's good, said Pellerat with animation. If Earth is a unique world in its production of variegated species and the evolution of intelligence, then we want some physical uniqueness. But what could a large satellite have to do with variegated species, intelligence, and all that? Well, now, there you hit a difficulty. I don't really know, but it's worth examination, don't you think? Trevize rose to his feet and folded his arms across his chest. But what's the problem, then? Look up the statistics on inhabited planets and find one that has a period of rotation and of revolution that are exactly one galactic standard day and one galactic standard year in length, respectively. And if it also has a gigantic satellite, you'd have what you want. I presume from your statement that you have an excellent possibility in mind, that you've done just this, and that you have your world. Pellerat looked disconcerted. Well, now, that's not exactly what happened. I did look through the statistics, or at least I had it done by the astronomy department, and, well, to put it bluntly, there's no such world. Trevize sat down again abruptly. But that means your whole argument falls to the ground. Not quite, it seems to me. What do you mean, not quite? You produce a model with all sorts of detailed descriptions, and you can't find anything that fits. Your model is useless, then. You must start from the beginning. No. It just means that the statistics on populated planets are incomplete. After all, there are tens of millions of them, and some are very obscure worlds. For instance, there is no good data on the population of nearly half, and concerning 640,000 populated worlds, there is almost no information other than their names and sometimes the location. Some galactographers have estimated that there may be up to 10,000 inhabited planets that aren't listed at all. The worlds prefer it that way, presumably. During the imperial era, it might have helped them avoid taxation. And in the centuries that followed, said Trevize cynically, it might have helped them serve as home bases for pirates, and that might have, on occasion, proved more enriching than ordinary trade. I wouldn't know about that, said Pellerat doubtfully. Trevize said, just the same, It seems to me that Earth would have to be on the list of inhabited planets, whatever its own desires. It would be the oldest of them all by definition, and it could not have been overlooked in the early centuries of galactic civilization. And once on the list, it would stay on. Surely we could count on social inertia there. Ballarat hesitated and looked anguished. Actually, there is a planet named Earth on the list of inhabited planets. Trevize stared. I'm under the impression that you told me a while ago that Earth was not on the list. As Earth, it is not. There is, however, a planet named Gaia. What has that got to do with it? Gaia. It's spelled G-A-I-A. It means Earth. Why should it mean Earth, Janoff, any more than anything else? The name is meaningless to me. Ballarat's ordinarily expressionless face came close to a grimace. I'm not sure you'll believe this, but if I go by my analysis of the myths, there were several different, mutually unintelligible languages on Earth. What? Yes. After all, we have 1,000 different ways of speaking across the galaxy. Across the galaxy there are certain dialectical variations, but these are not mutually unintelligible. And even if understanding some of them is a matter of difficulty, we all share galactic standard. Certainly, but there is constant interstellar travel. What if some world was in isolation for a prolonged period? But you're talking of Earth, a single planet. Where's the isolation? Earth is the planet of origin, don't forget, where humanity must at one time have been primitive beyond imagining, without interstellar travel, without computers, without technology at all, struggling up from non-human ancestors. This is so ridiculous. Ballarat hung his head in embarrassment at that. There is perhaps no use discussing this, old chap. I never have managed to make it convincing to anyone. My own fault, I'm sure. Trevize was at once contrite. Janoff, I apologize. I spoke without thinking. These are views, after all, to which I am not accustomed. You have been developing your theories for over 30 years, while I've been introduced to them all at once. You must make allowances. Look, I'll imagine that we have primitive people on Earth who speak two completely different, mutually unintelligible languages. 6, perhaps, said Ballarat diffidently. Earth may have been divided into several large land masses, and it may be that there were at first no communications among them. The inhabitants of each landmass might have developed an individual language. Trevize said with careful gravity, and on each of these land masses, once they grew cognizant of one another, they might have argued an origin question, and wondered on which one human beings had first arisen from other animals. They might very well, Golan. It would be a very natural attitude for them to have. And in one of those languages, Gaia means Earth, and the word Earth itself is derived from another one of those languages. Yes. And while Galactic Standard is the language that descended from the particular language in which Earth means Earth, the people of Earth, for some reason, call their planet Gaia from another of their languages. Exactly. You are indeed quick, Golan. But it seems to me that there's no need to make a mystery of this. If Gaia is really Earth, despite the difference in names, then Gaia, by your previous argument, ought to have a period of rotation of just one galactic day, a period of revolution of just one galactic year, and a giant satellite that revolves about it in just 1 month. Yes, it would have to be so. Well then, does it or doesn't it fulfill these requirements? Actually, I can't say. The information isn't given in the tables. Indeed? Well then, Janoff, shall we go to Gaia and time its periods and stare at its satellite? I would like to, Golan. Ballarat hesitated. The trouble is that the location isn't given exactly either. You mean all you have is the name and nothing more, and that is your excellent possibility? But that is just why I want to visit the Galactic Library. Well, wait. You say the table doesn't give the location exactly. Does it give any information at all? It lists it in the Seychelles sector and adds a question mark. Well then, Janoff, don't be downcast. We'll go to the Seychelles sector, and somehow we'll find Gaia. Chapter 7. Farmer. 23. Stargendibald jogged along the country road outside the university. It was not common practice for second foundationers to venture into the farming world of Trantor. They could do so, certainly, but when they did not venture either far or for long. Gendibald was an exception, and he had in times past wondered why. Wondering meant exploring his own mind, something that speakers in particular were encouraged to do. Their minds were at once their weapons and their targets, and they had to keep both offense and defense well honed. Gendebal had decided to his own satisfaction that one reason he was different was because he had come from a planet that was both colder and more massive than the average inhabited planet. When he was brought to Trantor as a boy, through the net that was quietly cast throughout the galaxy by agents of the Second Foundation on the lookout for talent, he found himself, therefore, in a lighter gravitational field and a delightfully mild climate. Naturally, he enjoyed being in the open more than some of the others might. In his early years on Trantor, he grew conscious of his puny, undersized frame, and he was afraid that settling back into the comfort of a benign world would turn him flabby indeed. He therefore undertook a series of self-developing exercises that had left him still puny in appearance, but kept him wiry and with a good wind. Part of his regimen were these long walks and joggings, about which some at the speaker's table muttered. Gendebal disregarded their chattering. He kept his own ways, despite the fact that he was first generation. All the others at the table were second and third generation, with parents and grandparents who had been Second Foundationers, and they were all older than he, too. What then was to be expected but muttering? By long custom, all minds at the speaker's table were open, supposedly all together, though it was a rare speaker who didn't maintain a corner of privacy somewhere, in the long run ineffectively, of course. And Gendebal knew that what they felt was envy. So did they. Just as Gendebal knew his own attitude was defensive, overcompensating ambition. And so did they. Besides, Gendebal's mind reverted to the reasons for his ventures into the hinterland. He had spent his childhood in a whole world, a large and expansive one, with grand and variegated scenery, and in a fertile valley of that world, surrounded by what he believed to be the most beautiful mountain ranges in the galaxy. They were unbelievably spectacular in the grim winter of that world. He remembered his former world and the glories of a now-distant childhood. He dreamed about it often. How could he bring himself to be confined to a few dozen square miles of ancient architecture? He looked about disparagingly as he jogged. Trantor was a mild and pleasant world, but it was not a rugged and beautiful one. Though it was a farming world, it was not a fertile planet. It never had been. Perhaps that, as much as any other factor, had led to its becoming the administrative center of first an extensive union of planets and then of a galactic empire. There was no strong push to have it be anything else. It wasn't extraordinarily good for anything else. After the Great Sack, one thing that kept Trantor going was its enormous supply of metal. It was a great mine, supplying 100 worlds with cheap alloy steel, aluminum, titanium, copper, magnesium, returning in this way what it had collected over thousands of years, depleting its supplies at a rate hundreds of times faster than the original rate of accumulation. There were still enormous metal supplies available, but they were underground and harder to obtain. The Hamish farmers, who never called themselves Trantorians, a term they considered ill-omened, and which the Second Foundationers therefore reserved for themselves, had grown reluctant to deal with the metal any further. Superstition, undoubtedly. Foolish of them. The metal that remained underground might well be poisoning the soil and further lowering its fertility. And yet, on the other hand, the population was thinly spread, and the land supported them, and there were some sales of metal always. Gendebal's eyes roved over the flat horizon. Trantor was alive geologically, as almost all inhabited planets were, but it had been 100 million years at least since the last major geological mountain-building period had occurred. What uplands existed had been eroded into gentle hills. Indeed, many of them had been leveled during the great metal-coating period of Trantor's history. Off to the south, well out of sight, was the shore of Capital Bay, and beyond that the Eastern Ocean, both of which had been re-established after the disruption of the underground cisterns. To the north were the towers of Galactic University, obscuring the comparatively squat but wide library, most of which was underground, and the remains of the Imperial Palace still farther north. Immediately on either side were farms, on which there was an occasional building. He passed groups of cattle, goats, chickens, the wide variety of domesticated animals found on any Trantorian farm. None of them paid him any mind. Gendebal thought casually that anywhere in the galaxy, on any of the vast number of inhabited worlds, he would see these animals, and that on no two worlds would they be exactly alike. He remembered the goats of home, and his own tame nanny whom he had once milked. They were much larger and more resolute than the small and philosophical specimens that had been brought to Trantor and established there since the Great Sack. Over the inhabited worlds of the galaxy, there were varieties of each of these animals, in numbers almost beyond counting, and there was no sophisticate on any world who didn't swear by his favorite variety, whether for meat, milk, eggs, wool, or anything else they could produce. As usual, there were no Hamish in view. Gendebal had the feeling that the farmers avoided being seen by those whom they referred to as scowlers, a mispronunciation, perhaps deliberately, of the word scholars in their dialect. Superstition again. Gendebal glanced up briefly at Trantor's sun. It was quite high in the sky, but its heat was not oppressive. In this location, at this latitude, the warmth stayed mild, and the cold never bit. Gendebal even missed the biting cold sometimes, or so he imagined. He had never revisited his native world. Perhaps, he admitted to himself, because he didn't want to be disillusioned. He had the pleasant feel of muscles that were sharpened and tightened to keenness, and he decided he had jogged just long enough. He settled down to a walk, breathing deeply. He would be ready for the upcoming table meeting, and for one last push to force a change in policy, a new attitude that would recognize the growing danger from the First Foundation and elsewhere, and that would put an end to the fatal reliance on the perfect working of the plan. When would they realize that the very perfection was the surest sign of danger? Had anyone but himself proposed it, he knew it would have gone through without trouble. As things stood now, there would be trouble, but it would go through just the same, for old Shandus was supporting him, and would undoubtedly continue to do so. He would not wish to enter the history books as the particular first speaker under whom the Second Foundation had withered. Hamish. Gendebal was startled. He became aware of the distant tendril of mind well before he saw the person. It was Hamish Mind, a farmer, coarse and unsubtle. Carefully, Gendebal withdrew, leaving a touch so light as to be undetectable. Second Foundation policy was very firm in this respect. The farmers were the unwitting shields of the Second Foundation. They must be left as untouched as possible. No one who came to Trantor for trade or tourism ever saw anything other than the farmers, plus perhaps a few unimportant scholars living in the past. Remove the farmers or merely tamper with their innocence, and the scholars would become more noticeable, with catastrophic results. That was one of the classic demonstrations which neophytes at the university were expected to work out for themselves. The tremendous deviations displayed on the prime radiant when the farmer minds were even slightly tampered with were astonishing. Gendebal saw him. It was a farmer, certainly Hamish to the core. He was almost a caricature of what a Trantorian farmer should be. Tall and wide, brown-skinned, roughly dressed, arms bare, dark-haired, dark-eyed, a long, ungainly stride. Gendebal felt as though he could smell the barnyard about him. Not too much scorn, he thought. Preem Palver had not minded playing the role of farmer when that was necessary to his plans. Some farmer he was, short and plump and soft. It was his mind that had fooled the teenaged Arcady, never his body. The farmer was approaching him, clumping down the road, staring at him openly, something that made Gendebal frown. No Hamish man or woman had ever looked at him in this manner. Even the children ran away and peered from a distance. Gendebal did not slow his own stride. There would be room enough to pass the other with neither comment nor glance, and that would be best. He determined to stay away from the farmer's mind. Gendebal drifted to one side, but the farmer was not going to have that. He stopped, spread his legs wide, stretched out his large arms as though to block passage, and said, "Ho, be you scowler?" Try as he might, Gendebal could not refrain from sensing the wash of pugnacity in the approaching mind. He stopped. It would be impossible to attempt to pass by without conversation, and that would be in itself a weary task. Used as one was to the swift and subtle interplay of sound and expression and thought and mentality that combined to make up the communication between Second Foundationers, it was wearisome to resort to word combination alone. It was like prying up a boulder by arm and shoulder with a crowbar lying nearby. Gendebal said quietly and with careful lack of emotion, "I am a scholar, yes." "Ho, you am a scholar. Don't we speak outlandish now? And cannot I see that you be one, or am one?" He ducked his head in a mocking bow. "Being as you be, small and weazened and pale and up-nosed." "What is it you want of me, Hamishman?" said Gendebal, unmoved. "I be titled Roofierant, and Carroll be my previous." His accent became noticeably more Hamish. His R's rolled throatily. Gendebal said, "What is it you want with me, Carroll Roofierant?" "And how be you titled, scholar?" "Does it matter? You may continue to call me scholar." "If I ask, it matters that I be answered, little up-nosed scholar." "Well, then, I am titled Steward Gendebal, and I will now go about my business." "What be your business?" Gendebal felt the hair prickling on the back of his neck. There were other minds present. He did not have to turn to know there were 3 more Hamishmen behind him. Off in the distance there were others. The farmer's smell was strong. "My business, Carroll Roofierant, is certainly none of yours." "Say you so?
Rouffirant's voice rose. "Mates, he says his business be not ours." There was a laugh from behind him, and a voice sounded. "Right he be, for his business be bookmaking and pewter rubbing, and that be not for true men." "Whatever my business is," said Gendebal firmly, "I will be about it now." "And how will you do that, wee scowler?" said Rouffirant. "By passing you." "You would try. You'd not fear arm stopping?" "By you and all your mates, or by you alone?" Gendebal suddenly dropped into thick Hamish accent. "Are you not for the line?" Strictly speaking, it was not proper to prod him in this manner, but it would stop a mass attack, and that had to be stopped, lest it force a still greater indiscretion on his part. It worked. Rouffirant's expression grew lowering. "If fear there be, book-boy, thou'rt the one to be full of it. Mates, make room. Stand back and let him pass, that he may see if I be feared the lane." Rouffirant lifted his great arms and moved them about. Gendebal did not fear the farmer's pugilistic science, but there was always a chance that a goodly blow might land. Gendebal approached cautiously, working with delicate speed within Rouffirant's mind. Not much, just a touch, unfelt, but enough to slow reflexes that crucial notch. Then out and into all the others, who were now gathering in greater numbers. Gendebal's speaker mind darted back and forth with virtuosity, never resting in one mind long enough to leave a mark, but just long enough for the detection of something that might be useful. He approached the farmer cat-like, watchful, aware, and relieved that no one was making a move to interfere. Rouffirant struck suddenly, but Gendebal saw it in his mind before any muscle had begun to tighten, and he stepped to one side. The blow whistled past, with little room to spare. Yet Gendebal still stood there, unshaken. There was a collective sigh from the others. Gendebal made no attempt to either parry or return a blow. It would be difficult to parry without paralyzing his own arm, and to return a blow would be of no use, for the farmer would withstand it without trouble. He could only maneuver the man as though he were a bull, forcing him to miss. That would serve to break his morale as direct opposition would not. Bull-like and roaring, Rouffirant charged. Gendebal was ready, and drifted to one side just sufficiently to allow the farmer to miss his clutch. Again the charge. Again the miss. Gendebal felt his own breath begin to whistle through his nose. The physical effort was small, but the mental effort of trying to control without controlling was enormously difficult. He could not keep it up long. He said, as calmly as he could, while batting lightly at Rouffirant's fear-depressant mechanism, trying to rouse in a minimalist manner what must surely be the farmer's superstitious dread of scholars. "I will now go about my business." Rouffirant's face distorted with rage, but for a moment he did not move. Gendebal could sense his thinking. The little scholar had melted away, like magic. Gendebal could feel the other's fear rise, and for a moment... But then the Hamish rage surged higher and drowned the fear. Rouffirant shouted, "Right, scholar be dancer. He do duck on nimble toes, and scorns the rules of honest Hamish blow for blow. Seize him, hold him. We will trade blow for blow, then. He may be first striker gift to me, and I will be last striker." Gendebal found the gaps among those who now surrounded him. His only chance was to maintain a gap long enough to get through, then to run, trusting to his own wind and his ability to dull the farmer's will. Back and forth he dodged, with his mind cramping in effort. It would not work. There were too many of them, and the necessity of abiding within the rules of Trantorian behavior was too constricting. He felt hands on his arms. He was held. He would have to interfere with at least a few of the minds. It would be unacceptable, and his career would be destroyed. But his life, his very life, was at hazard. How had this happened? 24. The meeting of the table was not complete. It was not the custom to wait if any speaker were late, nor, thought Shandus, was the table in a mood to wait in any case. Store Gendebal was the youngest, and far from sufficiently aware of the fact. He acted as though youth were in itself a virtue, and age a matter of negligence on the part of those who should know better. Gendebal was not popular with the other speakers. He was not, in point of fact, entirely popular with Shandus himself, but popularity was not at issue here. Delora Delarmy broke in on his reverie. She was looking at him out of wide blue eyes, her round face, with its accustomed air of innocence and friendliness, masking an acute mind, to all but other second foundationers of her own rank, and ferocity of concentration. She said, smiling, "First speaker, do we wait longer?" The meeting had not yet been formally called to order, so that, strictly speaking, she could open the conversation, though another might have waited for Shandus to speak first by right of his title. Shandus looked at her disarmingly, despite the slight breach in courtesy. "Ordinarily we would not, Speaker Delarmy, but since the table meets precisely to hear Speaker Gendebal, it is suitable to stretch the rules." "Where is he, First Speaker?" "That, Speaker Delarmy, I do not know." Delarmy looked about the rectangle of faces.
There was the first speaker and what should have been 11 other speakers, only 12. Through 5 centuries, the Second Foundation had expanded its powers and its duties, but all attempts to expand the table beyond 12 had failed. 12 it had been after Selden's death, when the second first speaker, Selden himself had always been considered as having been the first of the line, had established it, and 12 it was. Why 12? That number divided itself easily into groups of identical size. It was small enough to consult as a whole, and large enough to do work in subgroups. More would have been too unwieldy, fewer too inflexible. So went the explanations. In fact, no one knew why the number had been chosen or why it should be immutable. But then, even the Second Foundation could find itself a slave to tradition. It took Delarmy only a flashing moment to have her mind twiddle the matter as she looked from face to face and mind to mind, and then sardonically at the empty seat, the junior seat. She was satisfied that there was no sympathy at all with Gendebal. The young man, she had always felt, had all the charm of a centipede and was best treated as one. So far, only his unquestioned ability and talent had kept anyone from openly proposing trial for expulsion. Only 2 speakers had been impeached, but not convicted, in the hemimillennial history of the Second Foundation. The obvious contempt, however, of missing a meeting of the table was worse than many an offense, and Delarmy was pleased to sense that the mood for trial had moved forward rather more than a notch. She said, "First Speaker, if you do not know the whereabouts of Speaker Gendebal, I would be pleased to tell you." "Yes, Speaker." "Who among us does not know that this young man," she used no honorific in speaking of him, and it was something that everyone noted, of course, "finds business among the Hainish continually. What that business might be, I do not ask, but he is among them now, and his concern with them is clearly important enough to take precedence over this table." "I believe," said another of the speakers, "that he merely walks or jogs as a form of physical exercise." Delarmy smiled again. She enjoyed smiling. It cost her nothing. "The university, the library, the palace, and the entire region surrounding these are ours. It is small in comparison with the planet itself, but it contains room enough, I think, for physical exercise. First Speaker, might we not begin?" The first speaker sighed inwardly. He had the full power to keep the table waiting, or indeed to adjourn the meeting until a time when Gendebal was present. No first speaker could long function smoothly, however, without at least the passive support of the other speakers, and it was never wise to irritate them. Even Preem Palver had occasionally been forced into cajolery to get his way. Besides, Gendebal's absence was annoying, even to the first speaker. The young speaker might as well learn he was not a law unto himself. And now, as first speaker, he did speak first, saying, "We will begin. Speaker Gendebal has presented some startling deductions from prime radiant data. He believes that there is some organization that is working to maintain the Selden plan more efficiently than we can, and that it does so for its own purpose. We must, in his view, therefore, learn more about it out of self-defense. You all have been informed of this, and this meeting is to allow you all a chance to question Speaker Gendebal, in order that we may come to some conclusion as to future policy." It was, in fact, even unnecessary to say this much. Shandas held his mind open, so they all knew. Speaking was a matter of courtesy. Delarmy looked about swiftly. The other 10 seemed content to allow her to take on the role of anti-Gendebal spokesperson. She said, "Yet Gendebal," again the omission of the honorific, "does not know and cannot say what or who this other organization is." She phrased it unmistakably as a statement, which skirted the edge of rudeness. It was as much as to say, "I can analyze your mind, you need not bother to explain." The first speaker recognized the rudeness and made the swift decision to ignore it. "The fact that Speaker Gendebal," he punctiliously avoided the omission of the honorific, and did not even point up the fact by stressing it, "does not know and cannot say what the other organization is, does not mean it does not exist. The people of the First Foundation, through most of their history, knew virtually nothing about us, and, in fact, know next to nothing about us now. Do you question our existence?" "It does not follow," said Delarmy, "that because we are unknown and yet exist, that anything in order to exist need only be unknown." And she laughed lightly. "True enough. That is why Speaker Gendebal's assertion must be examined most carefully. It is based on rigorous mathematical deduction, which I have gone over myself, in which I urge you all to consider. It is," he searched for a cast of mind that best expressed his views, "not unconvincing." "And this first foundationer, Golan Trevize, who hovers in your mind, but whom you do not mention?" Another rudeness, and this time the first speaker flushed a bit. "What of him?" The first speaker said,
It is Speaker Gendaball's thought that this man Trevize is the tool, perhaps an unwitting one, of this organization, and that we must not ignore him.
If, said Delarmy, sitting back in her chair and pushing her graying hair backward and out of her eyes, this organization, whatever it is, exists, and if it is dangerously powerful in its mental capabilities and is so hidden, is it likely to be maneuvering so openly by way of someone as noticeable as an exiled councilman of the First Foundation? The first speaker said gravely, "One would think not. And yet I have noticed something that is most disquieting. I do not understand it." Almost involuntarily, he buried the thought in his mind, ashamed that others might see it. Each of the speakers noted the mental action, and, as was rigorously required, respected the shame. Delarmy did too, but she did so impatiently. She said, in accordance with the required formula, "May we request that you let us know your thoughts, since we understand and forgive any shame you may feel?" The first speaker said, "Like you, I do not see on what grounds one should suppose Councilman Trevize to be a tool of the Author organization, or what purpose he could possibly serve if he were. Yet Speaker Gendaball seems sure of it, and one cannot ignore the possible value of intuition in anyone who has qualified for Speaker. I therefore attempted to apply the plan to Trevize." "To a single person?" said one of the speakers in low-voiced surprise, and then indicated his contrition at once for having accompanied the question with a thought that was clearly the equivalent of, "What a fool." "To a single person," said the first speaker, "and you are right. What a fool I am. I know very well that the plan cannot possibly apply to individuals, not even to small groups of individuals. Nevertheless, I was curious. I extrapolated the interpersonal intersections far past the reasonable limits, but I did it in 16 different ways and chose a region rather than a point. I then made use of all the details we know about Trevize. A councilman of the First Foundation does not go completely unnoticed, and of the Foundation's mayor. I then threw it all together rather higgledy-piggledy, I'm afraid." He paused. "Well," said Delarmy, "I gather you... were the results surprising?" "There weren't any results, as you might all expect," said the first speaker. "Nothing can be done with a single individual. And yet...
"And yet, I have spent 40 years analyzing results, and I have grown used to obtaining a clear feeling of what the results would be before they were analyzed, and I have rarely been mistaken. In this case, even though there were no results, I developed the strong feeling that Gendaball was right, and that Trevize should not be left to himself."
"Why not, first speaker?" asked Delarmy, clearly taken aback at the strong feeling in the first speaker's mind.
"I am ashamed," said the first speaker, "that I have let myself be tempted into using the plan for a purpose for which it is not fit. I am further ashamed now that I am allowing myself to be influenced by something that is purely intuitive. Yet I must, for I feel this very strongly. If Speaker Gendaball is right, if we are in danger from an unknown direction, then I feel that when the time comes that our affairs are at a crisis, it will be Trevize who will hold and play the deciding card."
"On what basis do you feel this?" said Delarmy, shocked. First Speaker Shandus looked about the table miserably.
"I have no basis. The psychohistorical mathematics produces nothing. But as I watched the interplay of relationships, it seemed to me that Trevize is the key to everything. Attention must be paid to this young man."
25. Gendaball knew that he would not get back in time to join the meeting of the table. It might be that he would not get back at all. He was held firmly, and he tested desperately about him to see how he could best manage to force them to release him. Ruferunt stood before him now, exultant.
"Be you ready now, scholar? Blow for blow, strike for strike, Hamish fashion. Come then, art the smaller, strike then first."
Gendaball said, "Will someone hold thee then, as I be held?"
Ruferunt said, "Let him go. Nah, his arms alane. Leave arms free, but hold legs strong. We want no dancing."
Gendaball felt himself pinned to the ground. His arms were free.
"Strike, scholar," said Ruferunt. "Give us a blow."
And then Gendaball's probing mind found something that answered. Indignation, a sense of injustice and pity. He had no choice. He would have to run the risk of outright strengthening and then improvising on the basis of... There was no need. He had not touched this new mind, yet it reacted as he would have wished, precisely. He suddenly became aware of a small figure, stocky with long, tangled black hair and arms thrust outward, careening madly into his field of view and pushing madly at the Hamish farmer. The figure was that of a woman.
Gendebal thought grimly that it was a measure of his tension and preoccupation that he had not noted this till his eyes told him so.
"Carol Ruffiant," she shrieked at the farmer, "art bully and coward. Strike for strike, Hamish fashion. You be 2 times yon scowler's size. You'll be in more sore danger attacking me. Be there renown and passion yon poor spalp. There'll be shame, I'm thinking. It'll be a fair heap of finger-pointing, and there'll be full saying, yon be Ruffiant, renowned baby smasher. It'll be laughter, I'm thinking, and no decent Hamish woman will be drinking with you, and no decent Hamish woman will be out with you."
Ruffiant was trying to stem the torrent, warding off the blows she was aiming at him, attempting weakly to answer with a placating, "Now, sorra! Now, sorra!" Gendebal was aware that hands no longer grasped him, that Ruffiant no longer glared at him, that the minds of all were no longer concerned with him. Sura was not concerned with him either. Her fury was concentrated solely on Ruffiant. Gendebal, recovering, now looked to take measures to keep that fury alive and to strengthen the uneasy shame flooding Ruffiant's mind, and to do both so lightly and skillfully as to leave no mark. Again, there was no need. The woman said,
"All of you backstep. Look here. If it be not sufficient that this Carol Heap be like giant to this starveling, there must be 5 or 6 more of you ally friends to share in shame and go back to farm with glorious tale of daring do and baby smashing. I held the spalp's arm, you'll say, and giant Ruffiant Block pashed him in the face when he was not to backstrike. And you'll say, but I held his foot, so give me also glory. And Ruffiant Chunk will say, I could not have him on his lane, so my 4 mates pinned him, and with the help of all 6 I gloried on him."
"But, Sura," said Ruffiant, almost whining, "I told Scowler he might have first try."
"And fearful ye were of the mighty blows of his thin arms. Not so, Ruffiant Thickhead. Come, let him go where he be going. The rest of you to your homes back crawl, if so be those homes will still find a welcome making for you. You had all best hope the grand deeds of this day be forgotten. And they will not be, for I be spreading them far wide, if you do make me any the more fiercely raging that I be raging now."
They trooped off, quietly, heads hanging, not looking back. Gendebal stared after them, then back at the woman. She was dressed in blouse and trousers, with rough-made shoes on her feet. Her face was wet with perspiration, and she breathed heavily. Her nose was rather large, her breasts heavy, as best Gendebal could tell through the looseness of her blouse, and her bare arms muscular. But then the Hamish women worked in the fields beside their men. She was looking at him sternly, arms akimbo.
"Well, Scowler, why be lagging? Go on to the place of Scowlers. Be afeard. Shall I accompany you?"
Gendebal could smell the perspiration on clothes that were clearly not freshly laundered, but under the circumstances it would be most discourteous to show any repulsion. "I thank you, Miss Sura."
"The name be Novi," she said gruffly. "Sura Novi. You may say Novi. It be unneeded to more say."
"I thank you, Novi. You have been very helpful. You'll be welcome to accompany me, not for fear of mine, but for company pleasure in you." And he bowed gracefully, as he might have bowed to one of the young women at the university. Novi flushed, seemed uncertain, and then tried to imitate his gesture. "Pleasure be mine," she said, as though searching for words that would adequately express her pleasure and lend an air of culture. They walked together. Gendebal knew well that each leisurely step made him the more unforgivably late for the table meeting, but by now he had had a chance to think on the significance of what had taken place, and he was icily content to let the lateness grow. The university buildings were looming ahead of them when Sura Novi stopped and said hesitantly, "Master Scowler?" Apparently, Gendebal thought, as she approached what she called the place of Scowlers, she grew more polite. He had a momentary urge to say, "Address you not, yon poor spalp," but that would embarrass her beyond reason. "Yes, Novi?"
"Be it very fine-like and rich in place of Scowlers?"
"It's nice," said Gendebal.
"I once dreamed I'd be in place, and I be Scowler."
"Some day," said Gendebal politely, "I'll show it thee." Her look at him showed plainly she didn't take it for mere politeness. She said,
"I can write. I be taught by schoolmaster. If I write letter to thee," she tried to make it casual, "how do I mark it so it come to thee?"
"Just say, Speaker's House, apartment 27, and it will come to me. But I must go, Novi." He bowed again, and again she tried to imitate the action. They moved off in opposite directions, and Gendebal promptly put her out of his mind. He thought instead of the table meeting, and, in particular, of Speaker Delora Delarmy. His thoughts were not gentle.